No one was watching the old woman, not truly. They saw her, of course. London was too crowded not to see. They saw the ruined bonnet slipping crookedly over her silver hair. They saw the gloves torn at the fingers. They saw the hem of her dark gown soaked black with gutter water. They saw an inconvenience, a poor, trembling inconvenience standing outside a closed bakery while the rain fell over Covent Garden like a curtain of cold needles. It was dusk, that hour when London changed faces. The shopkeepers barred their doors. The flower girls gathered their baskets. The gentlemen hurried toward clubs and warm dining rooms. The ladies lifted their skirts away from the mud and turned their faces from anything unpleasant. Carriage wheels hissed through puddles. A lamplighter moved along the street, touching flame to glass, one golden circle after another. Somewhere a bell tolled the hour with a solemn, distant sound, and still the old woman stood there. Her lips trembled. "My son," she whispered. No one stopped. My son, in a fine beaver hat, paused just long enough to frown. "London grows worse by the year," he muttered, then stepped around her as if she were refuse swept from a doorway. A woman with a young daughter pulled the child. "Do not look," she said sharply. Such people often pretend confusion. The child looked anyway. The old woman reached one shaking hand toward them, not begging for coins, not begging for bread, but begging to be recognized as human. "My son," she breathed. "Please, I must find him." The lady turned away. A coachman shouted when the old woman staggered too near the wheel of his carriage. "Mind yourself, you old fool." The horses tossed their heads. The carriage rolled on. Mud splashed across the old woman's gown. She flinched, then she stood still again. Rain slid from the brim of her bonnet onto her cheek, so it was impossible to know whether she was crying. No one saw a mother. No one saw grief. No one saw a woman who had once been dressed in silk, bowed to in drawing rooms, and escorted through assembly halls beneath chandeliers. They saw only what rain and weakness had made of her. A poor stranger, a nuisance, a body in the way. Then Clara Hartwell stopped. She had no reason to stop. Not one reason would have considered wise. Clara was 19 years old. Though hardship had taught her the careful movements of a woman older than her years, she was not tall, she was not grand, she had no jewels, no companion, no carriage waiting at the corner. Her brown dress was plain and worn at the cuffs. Her shawl was thin. Her shoes leaked so badly that every step pressed cold water against her stockings. Under one arm, she carried a cloth bundle containing all that remained of her life, 2 shifts, a cracked comb, a little book of sermons that had belonged to her mother, a needle case, 3 folded letters too painful to read and too precious to throw away. That morning she had still possessed employment. By afternoon she had been dismissed. By evening she had no wages, no reference, no supper waiting, and nowhere certain to sleep. The mistress of the dressmaker's shop had spoken with the polite cruelty of those who know a poor girl cannot afford. Anger. "We are reducing hands, Miss Hartwell, you understand. Times are difficult. I cannot pay for work that did not bring profit." "But I worked the whole week," Clara had whispered. "And your room was provided during that time," the woman replied. "Do not make yourself unpleasant." Unpleasant. That was what hunger became when it spoke. So Clara had gathered her things, tied them into the cloth bundle, and walked out beneath a sky already turning the color of lead. She had 1 piece of bread left, 1. It lay wrapped in a scrap of paper in her pocket, stale hard at the edge, bought with her final coin at noon, when she had still believed she would be paid. She had not eaten it yet. She had meant to save it until night. That bread was not comfort. It was not charity. It was survival. And now an old woman stood outside the bakery with rain shaking from her lashes, whispering for a son who did not come. Clara's hand moved to her pocket, then stopped. Her stomach cramped with hunger, sharp and humiliating. She looked at the old woman. Then at the bakery door shut and barred, then at the passing crowd. Surely someone else would help, someone with coins, someone with a carriage, someone with a servant, someone whose supper's already waiting on silver. But London moved around, suffering the way a river moves around stone. Clara took 1 step forward. "My lady," she said softly, though the woman's appearance gave no reason for such a title. The old woman's eyes shifted toward her. They were pale, clouded with fever or fright. Yet behind the confusion there was something terribly refined in them, like candlelight seen through fog. "My son," the woman whispered. "I was to find him. He will be angry. No, he will be afraid. I must not make him afraid." Clara's throat tightened. "Where does your son live?" The old woman frowned, trying to pull the answer from the storm inside her mind. "Wycliffe," she said. It might have been a name. It might have been a place. It might have been only the broken sound of memory. "Is that his name?" Clara asked. The woman looked suddenly frightened. "I cannot remember the street." Her lips shook harder. "I cannot remember my own way home." A passerby laughed under his breath. "Gin likely." Clara turned her head. The man looked at her plain dress, her wet shawl, her bundle, and smirked as if one beggar had found another. Clara said nothing. She had learned that dignity was sometimes the weapon the poor were allowed to carry. The old woman clutched at her own arms. So cold, she whispered. Clara stood very still. The rain tapped against the bakery awning. Carriages rattled past. From inside the nearby tavern came the sound of men laughing over hot food and ale. Clara thought of the bread in her pocket. She thought of the night ahead. She thought of how hunger made the body feel hollow, as if one's bones were made of glass. Then another memory rose inside her. Her mother's voice, always warm despite the little fire they could afford. Remember, Clara, true breeding is shown when no one can reward you. Her mother had said it on a winter morning years ago. After giving their last candle to a neighbor whose child was ill, Clara had not understood then. She understood now. True breeding was not a crest stamped into silver. It was not an estate. It was not a title spoken before one's name. It was what remained when no one was watching. Clara drew the bread from her pocket. For one small, shameful second, her fingers tightened around it. Then she knelt before the old woman in the rain. Here, she said, eat a little. The old woman stared at the bread as if it was something holy. No, she whispered, it is yours. Yes, Clara said, and smiled though her mouth trembled. That is why I may give it. The old woman's eyes filled. Clara broke the bread carefully, softening the smaller piece between her damp fingers and held it out. The woman took it with both hands. She ate slowly, as if remembering manners of three. Then she began to cry. Not loudly, not with the theatrical grief of someone seeking attention. She cried like a person whose heart had been holding itself upright for too long and had finally fallen to its knees. Clara untied her shawl. The cold struck her shoulders immediately. She hesitated only once. Then she wrapped the shawl around the old woman and tucked it close beneath her chin. There, Clara murmured. You must keep warm. The woman caught Clara's hand. Her fingers were icy. Do not leave me. Clara looked down the street. She knew what it meant to stay. It meant losing any chance of finding decent shelter before dark. It meant giving away warmth when she had none to spare. It meant standing beside a stranger while London judged them both. But the woman's grip tightened with the desperation of a child. So Clara sat beside her under the bakery awning, she said. The old woman leaned toward her. My son, she whispered again. We shall find him, Clara answered, though she had no idea how. For nearly an hour they remained there. The rain deepened. The street grew darker. Carriage lamps became floating stars in the mist. Clara rubbed the old woman's hands between her own. She asked questions gently. She learned almost nothing. The woman remembered a garden, a black gate, a portrait of a man with kind eyes, a boy who had once cried into her lap after falling from a pony, she whispered once. Then she seemed startled by the name, as if she had found a coin in ashes. Alistair, Clara. Old woman shut her eyes. My son. Clara stored the name carefully. Alistair. It sounded like the name of a gentleman. Perhaps, she thought, if she could find a parish constable or a respectable innkeeper, someone might know where to inquire. A shout sounded down the street. Lady Eleanor. The old woman stiffened. Another shout followed. My lady. A young footman came running through the rain, his livery darkened by water, his breath clouding in the cold air. Behind him came another servant carrying a lantern. The first footman nearly passed them. Then the old woman shifted. Her torn glove slipped from one hand. The lantern light touched a ring on her finger. Black enamel, gold edges, a crest Clara did not know. The footman stopped so abruptly he almost fell. His face drained of color. He stared at the ring, then at the old woman. With a sound between relief and horror, he dropped to one knee in the mud. My lady, he whispered. The old woman blinked at him. The footman bowed his head lower. Dowager Viscountess Eleanor Wickhold. Not from rain, not from hunger. From the sudden, impossible understanding that the poor stranger beside her was not poor at all. The woman wrapped in Clara's thin shawl was a viscountess, a missing viscountess, a lady of rank, a lady whose name could open doors Clara would never be allowed to touch. The second servant turned and shouted into the street. Send word, she is found, she is found. Everything changed at once. The street that had ignored the old woman now looked. The gentleman who had muttered earlier paused at the corner. The lady with the child turned back, her face pale. The coachman removed his hat. Respect arrived late, dressed as embarrassment. Clara slowly withdrew her hand from the dowager's grasp, but the old woman caught it again. No, she whispered, the girl with the bread. The footman looked at Clara for the first time. His eyes moved over her soaked dress, her bare shoulders, her poor bundle, the absence of shawl. Then he saw the remaining crumbs in the dowager's hand. Understayed with her? He asked. Clara rose awkwardly. I only gave her something to eat. The word sounded too small for the moment. A carriage thundered into the street. Black, polished, severe. Its lamps burned through the rain like judgment. The horses stopped hard enough to splash water against the curb. The door opened before the footman could reach it. A man stepped down. Hatless in the rain, as if he had forgotten the weather existed. The street seemed to shrink around him. He had the kind of face people obeyed before they liked him. Strong brow, sharp cheekbones, mouth set in a line of controlled fear. His black hair was damp at the temples, his gloves wet. His entire figure held together by discipline so fierce it looked almost like anger, but when he saw the old woman, that discipline cracked. "Mother." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. The dowager lifted her head. For one heartbeat, confusion remained. Then something in her recognized him. "My son," she breathed. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and dropped beside her, heedless of the mud. His hands came to her shoulders, careful despite their urgency. "Mother, thank God." Broke on the last word. Clara looked away. Some grief was too private for strangers. The old woman touched his face. "You came. I have been searching every street in London," he said, his tone low and strained. "I was lost, I know. The girl gave me bread." The man stilled. Only then did he turn. It was not a gentle gaze. It was searching, sharp. Accustomed to discovering lies before they could take root, Clara felt it pass over her face, her dress, her bare shoulders, her wet hair pinned badly beneath her bonnet, her hands reddened from cold. Then he saw the shawl around his mother. He saw the crumbs. He saw Clara shivering, and something unreadable moved across his face. The footman spoke quickly. "My lord." "She was with the dowager when we found her. Her ladyship was eating. It appears to have—" "I can see," the man said, "my lord." Clara lowered her eyes. So this was Alistair, Viscount Wycliffe. Even Clara, who moved in circles far below his world, had heard the name. People in workrooms spoke of certain noble houses the way sailors spoke of storms. Wycliffe House was one of them. Ancient, wealthy, proud. The present Viscount was said to be severe, impossible to impress, and colder than the marble floors beneath his own roof. Now he stood before Clara in the rain, and she believe help her? He asked. Clara lifted her chin. Not high, just enough to keep her dignity from drowning. "I only fed her, my lord." His eyes narrowed slightly. With what? She could have lied. She did not. "The last bread I had." The footman looked stricken. The dowager clutched the shawl. "The girl with the bread," she whispered again. Viscount Wycliffe's expression changed, not softened, not exactly, but something behind his eyes shifted as if a locked door had opened a fraction. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara Hartwell. Where's your family?" "Gone. Your employer?" Clara swallowed. "Also gone." As of this afternoon, his jaw tightened. A sensible girl might have begged then. A clever girl might have wept. Clara did neither. She stood in the rain with hunger hollowing her body, with no shawl, no wages, no home, and the eyes of half the street upon her. She asked for nothing. That, more than tears, seemed to disturb him. The dowager suddenly gripped his sleeve. "Do not lose her," she said. "I understand." "No," the old woman said with surprising force. "You do not." No one stopped. She stopped. Silence fell. The rain filled it. Viscount Wycliffe looked at Clara again. This time his gaze was not merely suspicious, it was troubled, as if she had done something for which his world had no proper category. A poor girl had fed a noblewoman. A starving seamstress had given charity to a viscount's mother, and now the rules had become inconvenient. He rose. "Miss Hartwell." Clara stiffened. "Yes, my lord. You will come with us." Her heart lurched. "I beg your pardon?" "My mother is unwell. She has asked that you not be lost." "You will enter the carriage." The words were not a request. They were an order wrapped in aristocratic habit. Clara looked toward the black carriage. Its interior glowed with warmth, polished wood, heavy curtains, a world away from the wet street beneath her feet. She should have been grateful. Instead, fear moved through her. Girls like Clara did not enter noble carriages without consequence. They did not cross thresholds into houses like Wycliffe's and remain unchanged. They could be rewarded, questioned, used, blamed, or forgotten. Sometimes all in the same day. "I meant no claim upon your family. I did not accuse you of one. Not yet." His tone seemed to say. The dowager reached for Clara again. "Please," she whispered. That word did what command could not. Clara stepped closer. The Viscount removed his own greatcoat and handed it to the footman. He said. Clara opened her mouth to refuse. Then the cold struck her so sharply that pride failed. The footman placed the coat around her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of rain, leather, and smoke from a gentleman's fire. Viscount Wycliffe helped his mother toward the carriage. He did not touch Clara, but when she hesitated, one foot on the step, he looked back at her. "Miss Hartwell," his voice was quieter now. "You gave my mother bread when London gave her nothing. Whatever else must be asked, that truth will be remembered." Clara searched his face. She could not tell whether the words were promise or warning, so she climbed into the carriage. The door shut. Outside, the street blurred behind rain-streaked glass. The same people who had ignored the old woman now watched the carriage depart in silence inside. The dowager leaned against Clara's shoulder and held her hand like a lifeline. Across from them, Viscount Wycliffe sat rigid in the shadows, his eyes fixed on Clara as if she were a mystery brought in from the storm. The wheels began to turn. Clara Hartwell had entered the evening with one piece of bread and nowhere to go. Now she was being carried through London beside the missing mother of one of England's most feared viscounts. She did not know whether she had been rescued. She did not know whether she was about to be questioned. She did not know that the simple act of feeding a stranger would bring her into marble halls, whispered cruelty, dangerous jealousy, and a love powerful enough to frighten them both. All she knew was this: the old woman had been hungry and Clara had stopped. By morning, the Viscount would know her name, and before the season ended, London would know it too. Wycliffe House did not look like a home. Not to Clara judgment. The carriage turned through black iron gates just as the rain began to soften into a silver mist. 2 lamps burned on either side of the entrance, their flames trembling. Behind glass beyond them rose a great London mansion of pale stone. Stern windows, carved pillars, and a front door so tall that Clara felt smaller before she had even stepped inside. This was not the kind of house one approached. It was the kind of house one was summoned to. The horses stopped. For a moment nobody moved. The Dowager Viscountess Eleanor Wycliffe still held Clara's hand. Her fingers had warmed a little beneath the heavy carriage blanket, but her face remained fragile and pale, as if the rain had washed pieces of her memory away. Across from them, Viscount Wycliffe sat in silence. Alistair Wycliffe had spoken little during the journey. He had asked his mother whether she felt pain. He had told the footman to ride ahead for the physician. He had ordered hot water, dry linen, and a fire in her chamber before the carriage had even reached the house. But he had not asked Clara another question. That frightened her more than suspicion. A man who questioned could be answered. A man who watched in silence was already weighing one's fate. Clara sat wrapped in his greatcoat, her damp dress clinging coldly beneath it. Her own shawl remained around the dowager's shoulders. In the dim carriage light, the old woman looked less like the abandoned stranger from the bakery, and more like what she truly was, a lady. Not because of the ring, not because of the name, but because dignity clung to her even through weakness. Clara wondered what clung to herself. Mud, hunger, a dismissed seamstress's shame, the faint smell of rain and stale bread. The carriage door open. Servants were already waiting beneath the portico. Too many servants, footmen in dark livery, a butler with silver hair and a face arranged into discipline, a housekeeper with a ring of keys at her waist, 2 maids holding warm blankets, a young maid near the back, wide-eyed and anxious, clutching a folded towel as if it were a shield. When the household saw the dowager, a tremor passed through them. Not loud. Wycliffe House did not seem like a place that allowed loud emotion, but the relief was there, in the butler's sudden bow, in the housekeeper's hand flying briefly to her mouth, in the young maid's eyes filling before she looked down. "My lady," the butler breathed. Viscount Wycliffe stepped down first, then turned to help his mother. The moment he touched her arm, the dowager tightened her grip on Clara. "The girl," she whispered. "Alistair's jaw will come inside. Miss Hartwell." Hearing her name spoken in that calm, aristocratic voice made Clara feel as if it had been dressed in borrowed silk. She stepped down carefully. Her shoes met the wet stone. A footman offered his hand. Clara hesitated because refusing would only call more attention to herself. The housekeeper's eyes moved over her at once. Not cruelly. The ruined hem, the old gown, the borrowed greatcoat, the bare throat where no scarf or ribbon concealed poverty, the small bundle pressed under one arm. Clara felt the inspection like cold fingertips. Then the doors opened, warmth breathed out, and Clara entered Wycliffe House. The first thing she noticed was the floor. Black and white marble stretched beneath her feet in a shining pattern that reflected the candlelight. Clara saw the muddy print of her shoe appear upon it and felt a sharp flush of humiliation. The second thing she noticed was the silence, not absence of sound. There were sounds everywhere: footsteps, whispered instructions, the crackle of a great fire burning somewhere beyond the hall, the faint clink of silver from a distant room, but all of it was controlled, contained, as if even the walls had been taught not to disturb the Wycliffes. Above the entrance hall, portraits stared down from gilded frames. Men in dark coats, women in pearls, children posed with spaniels and hoops. Each face looked settled in its own importance, as though the family had been noble for so long that even painted eyes expected obedience. Clara looked down quickly. She did not belong beneath those portraits. The dowager swayed. At once the house moved around her. "My lady must be taken upstairs," said the physician, who had arrived ahead of them and now hurried forward with a black leather case. "Warmth first, no excitement, no crowding." "Her chamber is prepared," the housekeeper said. The dowager turned her head, searching. "Clara," the name struck the hall. Every servant heard it. Clara froze. Viscount Wycliffe looked at his mother, then at Clara. "You will come as far as the chamber door," he said, not kindly, not unkindly. Simply as if his word was the law by which the house breathed. Clara followed. They moved up a staircase wide enough for royalty. Lamps glowed along the walls. Thick carpets swallowed every footstep. A maid rushed ahead. Another carried linen. The physician murmured instructions. The dowager kept glancing back, as if afraid Clara would vanish. "I am here," Clara said softly each time, and each time the old woman seemed to steady. At the chamber door, the physician turned. No more than necessary inside. The housekeeper guided the dowager in. Before the door closed, Eleanor Wycliffe looked once more at Clara. "The girl with the bread," she whispered. Then she disappeared into candlelight. The door shut. Clara stood in the corridor, suddenly alone in a house full of people. The greatcoat still hung from her shoulders. Water dripped from the hem of her dress onto the carpet. Two maids glanced at the floor, then at each other. Clara's face warmed. "I am sorry," she murmured. "I did not mean—" "Florence," the housekeeper's voice cut gently but firmly through the corridor. The young maid who had been holding the towel stepped forward. "Yes, Mrs. Vale, take Miss Hartwell to the small blue room. See that she is washed, dried, and given something suitable to wear, plain, respectable. Nothing from the family wardrobes. Yes, Mrs. Vale." The housekeeper turned to Clara. "I am Mrs. Vale. I keep this house. You will find that Wycliffe House runs on order. Order is kindness when properly understood." Clara was not sure whether that was comfort or warning. "Yes, ma'am, Mrs." Vale's eyes softened by a fraction. "You are cold. Go with Florence." Clara turned. Viscount Wycliffe stood at the far end of the corridor. He had heard everything. For one brief moment, Clara expected him to dismiss her, to say there had been a mistake, to send her back into the rain with a coin and a warning never to speak of what had happened. Instead, he said, "When Miss Hartwell is dry, bring her to the library." Then he walked away. The word library followed Clara down the corridor like a sentence waiting to be carried out. Florence led her through a side passage and into a small chamber with blue papered walls, a narrow bed, a washstand, and a little fire already burning in the grate. Compared with the grand hall below, it was modest. Compared with the uncertainty of the street, it was a palace. Florence shut the door. For the first time since entering Wycliffe House, Clara breathed. The maid looked at her with open sympathy. "You must be frozen through." "I am quite well," Clara said automatically. Florence gave her a look that was almost a smile. "In this house, miss, people say they are quite well when they are fainting, bleeding, or about to fall downstairs." Clara blinked. Then, despite everything, a small laugh almost escaped her. Florence set the down. "I am Florence Westbrook, housemaid, not important enough to terrify anyone, which is a blessing. I am Clara Hartwell." Her ladyship said your name as if it were scripture. Clara looked down. She was frightened. So were we all. Florence moved toward the washstand and poured warm water from a covered jug. Steam rose in a gentle cloud. "The Dowager has never done such a thing before. Slipping away, I mean. She went to visit the late Viscount's grave this afternoon, with her companion and the carriage. Then there was confusion at the churchyard. Her companion thought she had returned to the carriage. The coachman thought she had gone inside with the companion. By the time anyone understood, she was gone." Clara listened, heart heavy. So she was truly lost. Very truly, the simple words settled in Clara. Outside the bakery, so many had assumed the worst. Drink, begging, madness, deceit. She had only been lost and frightened, and Colons helped Clara remove the greatcoat. She hung it carefully over a chair before noticing Clara's thin dress beneath. Her expression changed. "You gave her your shawl." Clara touched her bare shoulder. She needed it more. Florence said nothing for a moment. Then she turned away too quickly and busied herself with the linen. "There is a borrowed gown here. It belongs to one of the upper maids who left last season. It should fit well enough, and stockings." "You are very kind." Florence glanced back. "No, I am useful. Kindness her." Clara lowered her eyes. "I have seen that tonight." Florence's voice softened. "Then you have seen London honestly." The washing was simple, but to Clara it felt almost sacred. Warm water against cold hands, a dry towel, a comb drawn carefully through damp hair. Stockings without grey gown, too loose at the waist but clean, with sleeves that covered the red marks of rain. Florence did not fuss. She did not pity too loudly. She did not ask the questions Clara feared most. At last Clara sat before the little fire while Florence knelt to mend a torn ribbon on the borrowed gown. "May I give advice?" Florence asked. Clara nodded. "When you go before his lordship, keep your chin level." Clara looked at her. "Is he so terrible?" Florence paused. "Terrible is not the word. He is exact. He sees everything. He trusts almost nothing. He loves his mother more than he allows anyone to know. And because of that, anything near her becomes a matter of suspicion. I do not blame him. You may not blame him and still be hurt by him. Both things can be true." Clara said nothing. Florence tied the ribbon and stood. "One more thing. In this house, pity can cut sharper than insult. If they pity you, they will expect you to be grateful for every breath. Do not let them make you small." Clara looked at the maid's face. For the first time that night, she felt something like friendship reach toward her. "I have been small for some time," Clara said quietly. Florence shook her head. "No, Miss Hartwell, poor is not small, remember that." A knock. Vale's voice followed. "His lordship is ready." The library waited below. Clara entered it alone. The room was enormous, dark, and lined from floor to ceiling with books bound in leather. A fire burned low in the grate. Heavy curtains shut out the rain. Candles stood on a great mahogany desk covered with letters, maps, estate ledgers, and folded documents sealed with wax. There were portraits here too. Not family portraits for display. These were sterner. Dead Wycliffe men in black coats watching over contracts and land as if even in death they were still measuring duty. Viscount Wycliffe stood behind the desk. He had changed his wet coat for a dry one, but there remained something storm-touched about him. His hair was neat again, his face composed, too composed. Miss Hartwell, my lord, sit. Clara sat on the edge of the chair facing him. She folded her hands in her lap. He did not sit. That made her feel more like a petitioner. You were employed at a dressmaker's shop. Name. Madame Leclerc's establishment near Covent Garden, though she is not French. Her name is Mrs. Briggs. A flicker passed over his face. It might almost have been amusement had he been a different man. And you were dismissed today. Yes, for what cause? Clara's fingers tightened. For being unnecessary, my lord. That is not a cause. It is often enough for girls without protection. He looked at her more sharply. Did you steal? No. Were you accused of impropriety? No. Were you dismissed for poor work? Clara lifted her chin. I sew beautifully. The answer came before fear could silence it. The Viscount studied her. For the first time, Clara saw that he was not merely intimidating. He was tired. There were shadows beneath his eyes. His mother's disappearance had marked him, though pride refused to display the wound openly. Why were you in that street at dusk? He asked. I had nowhere else to go. You expect me to believe that by chance, on the very evening my mother disappears, you are dismissed without wages, carrying your belongings with one piece of bread, and you happen upon her? Pain moved through Clara, sudden and hot. There it was. The suspicion Florence had warned her about. I do not know what you expect yourself to believe, my lord. His expression hardened. That is not an answer. Clara stood. She did not mean to, but she could not remain seated beneath accusation while hunger and exhaustion trembled through her body. I gave the bread before I knew your name, she said. I gave her my shawl before I knew her title. I stayed because she asked me not to leave. If I had known she was a viscountess, perhaps I would have been too frightened to approach her at all. So you may question me as long as you wish, but do not make my kindness into a scheme simply because you have known too many schemers. Silence struck the room. The fire cracked softly. Clara realized what she had said. In his own library, she lowered her eyes, but she did not apologize. Alistair Wycliffe remained still. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. What do you want from this house? Nothing. No money? No position? I had not thought beyond tonight. No reward? Clara looked up. My lord, I was hungry when I gave her the bread. If I had been seeking reward, I would have kept it until someone rich was watching. His face changed again. That almost hidden door behind his eyes opened another inch, then closed. You may remain tonight, he said. The physician has asked that my mother not be distressed. If she asks for you will come. Tomorrow we shall decide what is proper. The words stood between them like an iron gate. Clara curtsied. As you wish, my lord. She turned toward the door. Miss, she stopped. Yes? There was a pause. Have you eaten since noon? Pride rose first. Then truth defeated it. No, my lord. He looked away, as if displeased by the answer. You will be given supper, thank you. Clara said nothing. And warm stockings if the first pair is insufficient. She looked back then. His face remained severe, his posture remained cold. But the orders were not cold, they were care disguised as management. Thank you, my lord, she said again, softer this time. He gave no reply. So Clara left the library. In the corridor, Florence. She whispered, I think I have survived. Florence's mouth twitched. That is often the best one can say after leaving his lordship's library. Before Clara could answer, footsteps hurried down the hall. Mrs. Vale appeared. She is distressed. She will not settle. Clara forgot her own fear. Does she ask for her son, Mrs.? Vale looked at her strangely. She asked for you. Clara followed at once. The dowager's chamber glowed with light and candles. The physician stood near the bed. A companion Clara had not seen before sat stiffly in a chair, pale with guilt. The dowager lay propped against pillows, her silver hair braided loosely over one shoulder. She was crying, not loudly, but helplessly. I was in the rain, she whispered. There was a girl. Where is the girl? I am here, Clara said. Eleanor turned. Her face softened immediately. The girl with the bread. Clara came to the bedside. Yes, my lady. The dowager reached for her hand. You did not leave. No. The physician watched closely. Remarkable, he murmured. Viscount Wycliffe stood near the window, half hidden by shadow. He had been there all along. Clara felt his gaze. But she did not turn. The dowager clung to her fingers. They all passed by, Eleanor whispered. I could not remember. I could not make them see me. Clara's heart, I saw you. The old woman closed her eyes. Yes, and slowly, with Clara's hand in hers, she calmed. The physician waited several minutes, then turned to the Viscount. My lord, if I may speak plainly. You generally do, Alistair said. Her ladyship has suffered fever, shock, and exposure. Confusion may return in waves. Familiar anchors will help. Tonight this young woman appears to be one. The companion stiffened. Surely the household did not find her in the rain. The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Alistair looked at Clara. She cannot be kept in this chamber indefinitely. No, said the physician, yes. As a temporary companion, someone to read, sit, answer gently when memory fails. It may ease her recovery. Temporary companion. Clara understood the danger of those words. Not servant, not guest, something between. A position with no clear protection and many clear risks. Alistair understood it too. His expression hardened with thought. The dowager, half asleep now, murmured. A long silence followed. Then Alistair said, Miss Hartwell will remain until my mother is stronger. The companion looked displeased. Mrs. Vale looked thoughtful. Florence, from the doorway, looked relieved. Clara looked down at the dowager's hand around hers. I will do my best, she said. No, Alistair replied from the shadows. You will do exactly what is required, nothing. Clara turned then. For a moment their eyes met across the firelit chamber. He meant to protect his household from her. She could see that. But somewhere beneath that cold command, he also meant to protect her from the household. The realization unsettled her. Because kindness from a man like Viscount Wycliffe did not come gently, it came dressed as order. That night, Clara was given supper in the small blue room. Bread, soup, a little cold chicken, tea with more sugar than she would have dared take for herself. She ate slowly, carefully, as if the plate might disappear if she seemed too eager. Florence pretended not to notice. Mr. Henry Grantham noticed. He stood at the far end of the corridor, speaking quietly with Mrs. Vale about household accounts, but his eyes took in everything. The way Clara folded the borrowed napkin after use, the way she returned the spoon neatly to the tray, the way she looked toward the door before finishing the bread, as though still expecting someone to say she had taken too much, Mr. Grantham said nothing. By morning, Wycliffe House had learned Clara's name. By noon, the servants had formed opinions. Some said she was brave, some said she was fortunate, said no poor girl found a viscountess in the reign without heaven or cunning behind it. Some pitied her, some resented her, some watched to see whether she would ask for more. Clara asked for nothing. She sat beside the dowager and read from a book of gentle sermons when asked. She held the cup when Eleanor's hands trembled. She answered the same question 7 times without impatience. No, my lady, you are not in the rain. Yes, my lady, your son is safe. Yes, my lady, you are home. No, my lady, I have not gone. Eleanor listened. Each time she believed Clara more quickly than anyone else, and each time, from a doorway, a corridor, or the shadow of the room, Viscount Wycliffe watched. At first he watched like a magistrate, then like a son, then like a man confronted with something he could neither purchase nor command, peace. His mother slept longer that afternoon than she had in weeks. The physician called it improvement, Mrs. Vale called it providence, Florence called it Clara. But the peace did not last. Near dusk, wheels sounded outside the house. A carriage drew up, black like Wycliffe's. This one was pale, elegant, and polished to a shine. A footman opened the door. A woman stepped down, perfectly dressed. Her pelisse was the softest rose silk. Her bonnet held 2 curled feathers that had somehow survived the damp London air. Her gloves were spotless. Her smile was trained to enter rooms before she did. Lady Cressida Beaumont had arrived. She carried flowers, white lilies, expensive, fragrant. Useless, she entered Wycliffe House as if she had already measured the curtains for her future reign. Mrs. Vale received her, my lady. How is dear Lady Wycliffe? Cressida asked, her voice sweet enough to turn sharp at the edges. We were all beside ourselves with worry. I came the moment I felt it proper. The moment society would admire it, Clara thought, then was ashamed of the judgment. Cressida was led upstairs. Clara sat near the dowager's bed, mending the edge of a lace cap while Eleanor rested. When Lady Cressida entered, the room changed. Even the fire seemed to stand straighter. My dear Lady Wycliffe, Cressida said, moving gracefully toward the bed. What a dreadful ordeal, you poor, precious soul. Eleanor opened her eyes. For a moment she looked uncertain. Cressida leaned closer, smile fixed. It is Cressida. Lady Cressida Beaumont. You remember me, the dowager blinked. Then her gaze moved past Cressida to Clara. The girl with the bread. Clara set the lace aside and took her hand. Cressida's smile froze, only for a second, but Clara saw it. So did Florence. So did Viscount Wycliffe, who had entered quietly behind Lady Cressida. The room became very still. Cressida lowered the flowers. How sweet, she said. The words were gentle, the eyes were not. Alistair looked from his mother to Clara, then to Lady Cressida. Miss Hartwell has been of assistance. Clearly, Cressida replied. How fortunate for Miss Hartwell. Clara felt the insult, though it wore perfume. She lowered her gaze. The dowager squeezed her hand. No, Eleanor, fortunate for me. Cressida's fingers tightened round the flowers. Outside, the last light of day faded over London. Inside Wycliffe House, the first true whisper of danger entered the room in silk slippers. By nightfall, Lady Cressida Beaumont would tell her mother that Clara Hartwell must be removed, not because Clara had asked for too much, but because she had asked for nothing, and that made her dangerous. Clara Hartwell became useful before she became welcome. That was the first truth Wycliffe House allowed her. Usefulness was safer than beauty. Usefulness was quieter than gratitude. Usefulness could pass through corridors without demanding a place at the table, and so Clara made herself useful. She rose before the breakfast trays had been carried upstairs. She dressed in the plain grey gown Florence had found for her, pinned her hair neatly, and washed her face in cold water because she did not wish any servant to think she expected comfort. Then she waited outside the Dowager Viscountess's chamber until Mrs. Vale permitted her inside. Every morning began the same way. A fire burned low in the grate, the curtains were drawn back carefully to soften the daylight, a tray of tea sat cooling beside the bed, and Eleanor Wycliffe woke with fear already reaching for her. "Where am I?" "You are home, my lady," Clara would say. "What room is this?" "Your chamber at Wycliffe House. Was I in the rain?" "Yes, my lady." "But did he find me? Lord Wycliffe found you?" "My son, yes." "Your son?" Then came the question Clara had learned to expect. Did the girl leave? And Clara always answered softly, "No, my lady, I am here." Only then would Eleanor breathe. It was a small thing, that answer. 4 simple words, but in Wycliffe House, where everything had a price, a title, a purpose, and a proper place, those words became more valuable than medicine. The physician noticed it first. He was an elderly gentleman named Dr. Bellamy, with tired eyes and a habit of pressing 2 fingers to his lips before speaking. He visited twice each day, examined the dowager, asked careful questions, and gave instructions no one dared disobey. On the 3rd morning, he found Eleanor sitting upright while Clara read to her from a book of gentle essays. The dowager's hands were calm, her breathing was steady. Her eyes, though still clouded at times, followed Clara's voice like a thread leading her through fog. Bellamy stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he turned to Viscount Wycliffe, who had accompanied him upstairs. "There," the doctor murmured. Alistair frowned. "There what? That is what I meant. My mother listening to a sermon?" "No, my lord, your mother feeling safe enough to listen." Alistair said nothing, but his gaze moved to Clara. She felt it. She did not look up. By then, she had learned something important about the Viscount of Wycliffe. He was not a man who entered a room. He occupied it, even in silence. He changed the air. Mrs. Vale became more precise. Florence's jokes vanished behind lowered eyes. The physician chose his words more carefully. Clara, however, found his silence more difficult than his questions. In the library, his suspicion had wounded her. In the corridors, his restraint unsettled her. He watched everything, not rudely, not constantly, but completely. He noticed when she returned a borrowed handkerchief washed and folded. He noticed when she refused the sugared tea until Eleanor insisted. He noticed when she moved her chair back from the fire so the dowager might receive more warmth. He noticed, most dangerously of all, that Clara never asked for anything, not a better gown, not wages, not a promise, not even assurance that she would remain beyond the next day. That seemed to trouble him. For men like Alistair Wycliffe understood demands. They understood petitions, bargains, debts, ambitions, and calculated gratitude. But Clara Hartwell gave without extending her hand afterward, and that made her difficult to place. Days passed. Rain gave way to pale sunlight over London. The streets dried. Wycliffe House resumed the elegant rhythm of a noble home, but beneath that rhythm, something had changed. The dowager would not pass a morning without Clara. She liked Clara to read while she took tea. She liked Clara to mend small things beside her bed, a torn lace cap, a loose ribbon, a handkerchief with fraying edges, a little silk pouch that held dried lavender. These fingers were trained properly, Eleanor said one afternoon, watching Clara's needle move through fine lace, not by a careless shopwoman. "My mother taught me first," Clara replied. "Was she a seamstress?" "When she needed to be. A teacher when she could be. A lady always, though the world forgot to call her one." Eleanor turned her head slowly. There were days when confusion scattered her thoughts like leaves in wind. "Did she teach you to read?" "Yes, my lady." "And to give away your bread?" Clara's needle paused. The room became very still. Then she smiled faintly. "She taught me that hunger passes, but shame can remain a long time if one has been cruel." Eleanor's eyes filled. Clara bent again over the lace. "So were you." From the doorway, unseen by Clara, Alistair heard every word. He had come to ask Dr. Bellamy's opinion after the morning visit instead. He had stopped at the threshold, his hand still on the doorframe. He watched Clara lower her head, not in embarrassment but in concentration. A little shaft of light touched her hair. It was brown, ordinary brown perhaps, but clean and soft now, gathered at the nape of her neck with a plain ribbon she wore, no jewels, no curls arranged for admiration, no muslin chosen to flatter beneath candlelight, and yet his eyes remained on her, not because she shone, because she steadied. His mother, who had trembled through nights of fever and grief, sat calmly because a 19-year-old seamstress with no protection and no wages had learned the sacred art of staying. Alistair stepped back before Clara could notice him, but Eleanor saw. Age and illness had clouded many things, not everything. "My son watches you," she said, her finger. A tiny bead of red appeared. "Oh," Eleanor smiled. It was the first mischievous smile Clara had seen on her face. Clara pressed the finger quickly to her handkerchief. "I am afraid his lordship watches everyone." No, Eleanor said, settling against her pillows. He examines everyone. Watching is different. Clara did not answer. Her heart had begun beating foolishly, and Clara did not trust foolishness. She knew the distance between herself and Alistair Wycliffe. It was not merely a staircase or a dining room or the invisible line between servant and guest. It was centuries. He belonged to portraits, estates, legal seals, old silver, and carriages that stopped traffic in the rain. She belonged to narrow workrooms, unpaid wages, shared lodging houses, and the careful counting of crusts. A man might admire courage in a poor girl. He might even feel gratitude, but admiration and affection was not love. Clara told herself this firmly. Then that evening, she found him in the corridor. It happened after Eleanor had fallen asleep. Clara had remained beside her longer than necessary, mending the lace cap by candlelight while the room settled into quiet. The dowager slept peacefully, one hand curled beneath her cheek like a child. When Clara rose, she moved carefully, easing the chair back without sound. Outside, the corridor was dim. The lamps had been lowered. The carpet swallowed her step. The house seemed to hold its breath. She had taken only 3 paces when she saw him. Alistair stood near the window at the end of the corridor, one shoulder turned toward the glass. He was not dressed for company. His coat was dark, his cravat loosened slightly, his face half lit by the lamp beside him. He looked less like a feared viscount, more like a son who had nearly lost his mother and had not yet forgiven the world for it. Clara stopped. My lord, he turned. Miss Hartwell. I did not know anyone was here. I might say the same. I was leaving your mother to sleep. I know, of course he knew. He had known everything from the beginning. The silence between them stretched. Clara curtsied slightly and moved to pass. Miss Hartwell. She stopped again. Yes, my lord. He seemed to struggle with the next words, which startled her. Alistair Wycliffe did not seem like a man to whom words came unwillingly. He commanded them as he commanded servants, horses, and households. At last, he said, My mother slept 3 hours this afternoon. Clara waited. That is the longest she has slept without distress since my father's death. Anniversary? You did that? No, my lord, exhaustion did. Warmth did, the doctor did. My mother has had all 3 before. Clara looked down. I only read to her. She asks me to. You answer her questions, even when she repeats them. She cannot help needing the answer more than once. He looked at her then with an expression she could not name. Many people are impatient with weakness. Yes, Clara said softly. I know. The words were too honest. They revealed too much. Alistair's gaze sharpened, but not with suspicion this time. Attention. I owe you an apology, he said. Clara looked up quickly. My lord? For the manner in which I questioned you that first night. She did not know what to do with a viscount's apology. A command, yes. A criticism, yes. Suspicion, certainly, but not apology. It was understandable. She know, he replied. It was common. There is a difference. Clara's breath caught. The corridor seemed warmer suddenly. He continued stiffly, as if every word cost him something. I have spent too many years expecting motives to hide beneath good deeds. That expectation may have been earned. It was not earned by you. Clara held his gaze. She should have thanked him. She should have accepted neatly and escaped. Instead, she told the truth. I understood your suspicion, my lord, but understanding a wound does not make it painless. The words entered him. She saw it. Not visibly, perhaps. Not to anyone who did not know the language of restraint. But Clara saw the slight stillness, the way his eyes lowered for one moment to her hands. No, he said quietly, I imagine it does not. Another silence. This one felt different, not empty. Somewhere below, a clock struck 9. Clara gathered herself. Good night, my lord. Good night, Miss Hartwell. She walked away before her heart could make a fool of her. But Alistair remained at the window long after she was gone. The next day, Lady Cressida Beaumont returned, and with her danger learned to smile. She arrived near luncheon with her mother, Lady Beaumont, and enough flowers to fill 3 vases. Lady Cressida looked more beautiful than any woman Clara had ever seen closely. Her hair was arranged in glossy dark curls beneath a bonnet trimmed with ivory ribbon. Her gown was pale green muslin with embroidered sleeves. Her gloves were so white they seemed impossible in London. She kissed the air near Eleanor's cheek. My dearest Lady Wycliffe, you improve every hour. Eleanor looked at her politely. How kind. Then she turned her head. Clara, child, where is the blue shawl? Clara rose at once. It is folded beside your chair, my lady. Lady Cressida's eyes followed her. A small smile touched her lips. Miss Hartwell is very attentive. Lady Beaumont, seated near the fire, added, Indeed, one might almost think she had been trained for service in a great house. The words were not quite an insult that made them more effective. Clara handed the shawl to Eleanor and stepped back. I have been trained to be useful, my lady. Cressida's smile sharpened. How fortunate. Usefulness is such a comfort when one cannot aspire to elegance. Eleanor's head turned slowly. My dear Cressida, she said, elegance without kindness is only posture. The room stilled. Lady Beaumont's fan stopped moving. Cressida lowered her eyes. Of course, Lady Wycliffe. But Clara saw the flash of anger before it vanished. Alistair entered moments later. Cressida brightened at once. My lord, How relieved you must be. Your mother looks wonderfully restored. She is improving. I have been telling Mama that your household must have been in dreadful disorder without proper feminine direction. Clara felt Florence stiffen near the door. Alistair's face did not change. Mrs. Vale directs my household admirably, of course. I meant only that a family house benefits from family care. The implication settled delicately in the room. Lady Beaumont smiled behind her fan. Clara understood then Lady Cressida Beaumont did not visit merely from concern. She visited like a woman approaching a chair she believed already belonged to her. The future Viscountess Wycliffe. The thought should not have hurt. It did. Clara told herself that pain was foolish. Then Lord Edmund Haverford arrived 3 days later, and foolishness became useful to someone else. He came in the afternoon while Eleanor sat in the small drawing-room for the first time since her recovery began. The room overlooked the garden, where winter branches scratched lightly against the sky. Clara sat by the window, sewing a torn edge on Eleanor's silk wrap. A footman announced him. Lord Edmund Haverford. The gentleman who entered was handsome in a warmer, easier way than Alistair Wycliffe. Where Alistair was shadow and command, Edmund was sunlight on polished wood. He smiled readily. His hair curled attractively over his brow. His waistcoat was embroidered with subtle gold. His bow was elegant enough to be admired and relaxed enough to make admiration seem unimportant. "My dear Lady Wycliffe," he said, "you have given all London a fright. Then London must learn not to be so easily frightened." Edmund laughed. A pleasant laugh, a practice move to Clara. "And this must be Miss Hartwell?" Clara looked up, surprised. He bowed to her. Not as one bowed to a servant, not as one nodded to an inconvenience. He bowed as if she mattered. "London has heard whispers of your kindness," he said. "I am pleased to see the truth is gentler than gossip." Clara did not know how to answer. "I did very little, my lord. So says everyone who has done something worth remembering." The compliment warmed her before caution could stop it. From across the room, Florence looked uneasy. Lady Cressida, seated beside her mother, looked pleased, too pleased. That evening, Florence found Clara in the linen passage, carrying folded napkins. "Do not trust Lord Edmund," she whispered. Clara blinked. "I barely know him. That is often when gentlemen are most dangerous." Gentlemen who smile too easily usually have someone else listening. Clara remembered the warmth of Edmund's bow. Then she remembered Cressida's frozen smile. "You think Lady Cressida sent him?" "I think Lady Cressida does nothing without purpose." Clara said nothing. She wanted to believe Florence was wrong. Not because she cared for Lord Edmund, she did not, but because his courtesy had felt like a little proof that she was not invisible. And loneliness can make even false kindness feel like bread. Mr. Henry Grantham also noticed Edmund. The estate steward was a quiet man, neither young nor old, with observant grey eyes and a habit of appearing where accounts, keys, or truth had gone astray. He rarely wasted words. Servants respected him. Gentlemen forgot him. This made him useful. He saw Lady Credy's maid slip a folded note to the Beaumont footman near the rear entrance. He saw Edmund receive a similar note 2 hours later. He saw Lady Beaumont speak with Edmund alone in the blue salon, their voices low and urgent. He saw Cressida watch Clara every time Edmund smiled at her. Mr. Grantham said nothing, but like all careful men, he remembered the days took on a strange rhythm. Morning belonged to Eleanor. Clara read, sewed, answered questions, and sat through moments when the dowager's memory flickered in and out like a candle in a draught. Afternoon belonged to visitors. Lady Cressida came often. Lady Beaumont came with her. Lord Edmund came when he was invited and twice when he was not. Their voices filled the drawing-room with polite phrases and hidden edges. Evening belonged to silence and to Alistair. Not openly, never openly. But Clara began to notice him in the spaces between things, his hand reaching for a fallen book at the same moment as hers. Their fingers did not touch, but they both paused as if they had, his voice softening barely when he said her name, Miss Hartwell, her own heart answering before she did. His gaze lingering when Eleanor praised Clara's patience, his expression tightening when Edmund stood too near. One evening, Clara entered the library to return a volume Eleanor had finished. She thought the room empty. It was not. Alistair stood near the fire, reading a letter. Clara stopped. "I beg your pardon. You need not flee, Miss Hartwell. The library is large enough for 2 people. Not when one of them owns it." For a second, silence. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but near enough to make Clara's thoughts scatter. "Do you always answer so honestly?" "No, my lord. Sometimes I am too hungry or too afraid." His expression sobered. "Are you afraid now?" Clara held the book to her chest. "Yes." That surprised him. "Of me, of forgetting my place." The fire cracked. Alistair set the letter down. "And what is your place?" Clara looked around the room. At the shelves, the portraits, the heavy curtains, the desk where his world was written in ink and sealed in wax. "I am not certain anymore." The confession trembled in the air. Alistair took one step toward her, only one. "But the room seemed to change." "Nor am I," he said. Clara looked up. For one dangerous moment, neither of them moved. Then footsteps sounded outside. Florence appeared at the door. Begging pardon, my lord, Lady Wycliffe asks for Miss Hartwell. The spell broke. Clara curtsied quickly. Of course. She left with the book still in her hands and her heart beating as if she had run through rain. Behind her, Alistair stood alone before the fire. The letter on his desk remained unread. The trap in the garden was set the next afternoon. It was not intended to spring fully yet, only to begin. Eleanor had asked for air and Dr. Bellamy had permitted a short turn in the garden if she was warmly wrapped. Clara walked beside her chair while Florence carried a rug. Lady Cressida and Lord Edmund accompanied them. Because society had a way of attaching itself to weakness and calling it concern, the garden behind Wycliffe House was formal and severe, with clipped hedges, gravel paths, bare rose arches, and a fountain sleeping beneath a thin skin of winter ice. Eleanor tired quickly. Florence wheeled her chair back toward the terrace. Clara remained behind to retrieve the shawl that had slipped from the chair. When she turned, Lord Edmund was there. "Allow me." He picked up the shawl before she could reach it. "Thank you, my lord. You are very careful with her," he said. "With Lady Wycliffe, with everyone, I imagine?" Clara stepped back slightly. "I try to be. That must be exhausting." The words were soft. Too soft. Clara did not answer. "Edmund, I have made you wary." "No, my lord." "Yes, I have, but I cannot blame you. Wycliffe House is not gentle with unexpected guests." "I am not a guest." The question struck too close. Clara looked toward the terrace. "I am needed for the present." Edmund's expression gentled in a way that seemed almost sincere. "Being needed is not the same as being valued, Miss Hartwell." Clara's fingers tightened. He saw the wound. He pressed it. "You deserve more kindness than this house knows how to give." She should have walked away. Florence's warning echoed in her mind. Gentlemen who smile too easily usually have someone else listening. But Edmund's voice had found the lonely place inside her. The place that feared she was only a useful object in a noble household. A temporary comfort to be set aside once Eleanor recovered fully. "My lord, I should return." He bowed. Then, before Clara could prevent it, he took her gloved hand and raised it briefly. Not a kiss against skin. Nothing improper enough to cry scandal. Only a gentleman's gesture. Polished. Visible, his lips touched the back of her glove. At the library window above, Alistair Wycliffe stood behind the curtain. He had seen everything. Edmund released Clara's hand. Clara withdrew it quickly, cheeks hot with discomfort. "My lord, please do not forgive me," Edmund said, smiling. "I meant only respect." But his eyes flicked upward. Just once. Clara did not see it. Alistair did. Viscount Wycliffe's face became unreadable. But his hand closed around the curtain with such force that the heavy fabric twisted in his grip. Below, in the winter garden, Clara stood unaware that the first thread of scandal had been tied around her name. Lady Cressida watched from the terrace. Her smile was small, satisfied, and inside Wycliffe House, where marble remembered every footstep and whispers traveled faster than truth, the girl who had asked for nothing was about to be accused of wanting everything. The invitation was not meant for Clara Hartwell. Everyone understood that. The servants understood it when the silver was brought from the locked cabinet and polished until every spoon reflected candlelight. Mrs. Vale understood it when she inspected the great dining room twice before noon, correcting the distance between chairs by half an inch. Florence understood it when she found Clara in the dowager's sitting room, mending a loose ribbon on Lady Wycliffe's cap, and looked at her with troubled eyes. Even Clara understood it before anyone said a word. A formal dinner at Wycliffe House was not a meal. It was a declaration, a room full of old names, old fortunes, old grudges, old smiles sharpened until they could cut without drawing blood. That evening the Beaumonts would dine at Wycliffe House. So would Lord Edmund Haverford. So would the Ravenshaws, the Pembrokes, the Ellingtons, and Lord and Lady Ashbourne. Families with crests, families with carriages, families with daughters trained to laugh softly, lower their eyes at the correct moment, and destroy a rival without ever raising their voices. Clara had expected to remain upstairs. She had already planned it. She would sit near the dowager's chamber, mend the lace fichu Lady Wycliffe liked, and wait, in case the old woman became distressed. Florence would smuggle her a cup of tea, perhaps a little bread, and they would listen to the low music of aristocratic conversation drifting from. But Lady Wycliffe had other intentions. "You will sit beside me," Eleanor said. Clara's needle stopped. "My lady." The dowager sat near the window, wrapped in a soft ivory shawl. The fever had lifted from her face, though weakness still lingered in the delicate tremor of her fingers. Yet her eyes were clearer than they had been since the night of the rain. "You will sit beside me at dinner." Clara stared at her. "I cannot. Cannot is a word people use when they mean someone will be displeased. In this case, my lady, many people will be displeased. Then they may improve their characters." Clara lowered the lace in her lap. "I am not fit for such company." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "Child, I have spent 70 years in such company. Fitness is rarely the quality most present." Despite herself, Clara nearly smiled. Then fear returned. "They will laugh at," Eleanor said softly. "They will smile, but you will sit beside me all the same." Clara's throat tightened. "My lady, I am grateful for your kindness, but gratitude does not change my station. No, it reveals theirs." The words settled quietly between them. A knock sounded. Viscount Wycliffe entered. He had heard enough to understand. His gaze moved from his mother to Clara. "My lady wishes me to sit at dinner," Clara said, because it seemed better to confess before being accused. Alistair looked at Eleanor. "I am still capable of deciding who steadies me. That is not in question." "Then there is no difficulty." "There will be difficulty," he replied. Eleanor lifted one brow. "Then you may use that terrifying expression of yours. It has frightened better people than dinner guests." Clara looked down quickly. Alistair did not smile, but something moved in his eyes. Then he turned to Clara. "Miss Hartwell, if you attend dinner, you must understand what that room is." "A battlefield," she said before she could stop herself. His gaze sharpened. Then after a pause he said, "Yes." Clara's fingers tightened around the lace. "I have no armor, my lord. That is not true." She looked up. He held her gaze. "You have conduct." It should not have warmed her, it did, because Alistair Wycliffe did not flatter, he did not soothe with easy words. If he said she had conduct, he meant he had seen it. Too quietly. By 6 o'clock the house had transformed, candles burned in every sconce. The entrance hall shone beneath chandeliers. Footmen stood like carved figures beside the doors. The scent of beeswax, roasted meat, flowers, and expensive perfume moved through the corridors. Florence helped Clara dress in the small blue room. The gown was borrowed, of course. Plain cream muslin, once belonging to a companion who had left service years before. Florence had altered it in haste, taking in the waist and fixing the sleeve with clever stitches Clara could not help admiring. "It is not grand," Florence said, tying the ribbon at Clara's back. "It is more than I have any right to wear." Florence tugged the ribbon gently. "Do not say that tonight." Clara looked at herself in the glass. She did not look like a lady, not truly. Her hair was neat but simply arranged. No jewels touched her throat. Her gloves were mended at the wrist. The muslin fell cleanly, but anyone trained to notice such things would see it was not new. Still, she looked respectable. That would have to be enough. Florence came to stand beside her. "Keep your chin level," she said. "You have told me that before, and you keep forgetting when rich people breathe near you." Clara let out a small, nervous laugh. Florence's expression softened. "They will try to make you feel grateful for being allowed in the room. Do not let them. You are there because her ladyship asked for you, and because his lordship permitted it." Florence gave her a quick look. "His lordship permits very few things he does not wish to understand." Clara turned away from the mirror. "I do not understand him either." "No one does. That is why he is so feared." "And you?" Florence smiled faintly. "I think he is less cold than terrified of being wrong." Before Clara could answer, a bell sounded below. The guests had begun to arrive. The first to enter was Lady Cressida Beaumont. She wore silver silk. Of course she did. It was the kind of gown that did not merely catch candlelight, but seemed to command it. The fabric shimmered as she moved. Pearls glowed at her throat. Her dark curls were arranged with artful softness around a face so beautiful that cruelty had to work harder to be noticed. Her mother, Lady Beaumont, followed in deep violet, fan already in hand, smile already prepared. Lord Edmund Haverford arrived moments later, elegant and warm, bowing to everyone as though every soul in the room was his favorite. When his gaze found Clara, it lingered. Not long, only long enough. She looked away. She could still feel the ghost of his lips on her glove in the garden, and more than that, she could feel the weight of Alistair's unseen gaze from the library window. Had he misunderstood? Had he cared enough to misunderstand? The question made her chest ache. The dinner gong sounded. The company moved toward the dining room, and Clara stepped into the battlefield. It was beautiful. The long mahogany cruelty table gleamed beneath candles tall as chapel tapers. Silver branches held flames that trembled over crystal glasses and porcelain plates as white flowers ran down the center in careful abundance. Servants moved like shadows. Every chair had been placed with social meaning. Every glance measured rank. At the head of the table sat Viscount Wycliffe, Sever, and controlled, handsome in the most unforgiving way. At his right, where Lady Cressida had clearly expected to sit, a chair had been drawn for the Dowager Viscountess, and beside the Dowager, by Eleanor's own command, the room always noticed. Lady Cressida's smile did not fall, it froze. Lord Edmund's eyes brightened with interest. Lady Beaumont's fan opened slowly. A whisper passed between Lady Pembroke and Lady Ellington, wrapped in the delicate movement of gloves. Clara lowered herself into the chair. Her heart beat so hard she feared the crystal might hear it. Eleanor reached beneath the table and touched her hand once. A silent command, "Stay." The first course was served. Soup. No one insulted Clara during the soup. That would have been vulgar. Instead, they spoke around her. Of weather, of Almack's. Of a recent engagement between two families whose combined fortunes seemed to interest everyone more than the couple themselves. Of whether the Prince Regent's taste had improved or merely become more expensive. Clara listened. She understood more than they expected. Her mother had taught her to read newspapers when they could afford them and handbills when they could not. She knew enough of politics to stay silent, enough of society to see its performance, and enough of poverty to know that most wealthy complaints were luxuries wearing mourning clothes. Then Lady Cressida turned. "Miss Hartwell, is it?" Clara looked up. "Yes, how strange this must all be for you." Her tone was sweetness poured over ice. "A little," Clara said. "One imagines a house such as this differs greatly from a dressmaker's shop." "It does," Lady Cressida smiled. "And the bread here must be finer than bakery scraps." The table stilled by half a breath, not enough to condemn the remark, enough to enjoy it. Clara felt the heat rise in her face. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her glass. Alistair looked down the table at Cressida before he could speak. Clara answered, "Hunger makes little distinction, my lady. Kindness does." A fork touched porcelain too sharply. Lord Edmund smiled into his wine. Lady Cressida's eyes narrowed for the smallest moment.
How prettily said.
"Seamstresses must hear many speeches while fitting gowns. Enough to know which ones are stitched honestly." This time Lady Ashbourne coughed into her napkin. Alistair's mouth did not move, but his eyes changed. Cressida leaned back. The first blow, though, had failed to draw blood, so she waited. Cruelty, when practiced well, did not rush. The second course came. Fish. The conversation shifted. Lady Beaumont began, speaking of charity committees and the burden of managing the deserving poor. She said, "Is distinguishing true need from ambition. Some people mistake assistance for invitation." Clara did not look up. She knew the words had been placed for her like a trap. Lady Pembroke murmured, "Quite right." Lady Cressida turned to Eleanor. "Dear Lady Wycliffe, your generous heart is known everywhere, though I hope you are careful. Gratitude in the lower orders can become expectation if encouraged." Eleanor set down her fork. The sound was small, everyone heard it. Miss Hartwell expected nothing. "Of course," Cressida said. "How admirable." Lord Edmund entered then, smooth as silk. "I find Miss Hartwell's modesty refreshing. One meets so many ladies trained to display virtue. It is charming to encounter virtue unaware of itself." Clara's stomach tightened. There it was, the attention again. Too warm, too useful to someone else. She looked across the table. Alistair's eyes were on Edmund. Cold, dangerously cold. Cressida saw it too and smiled. "Lord Edmund," she said lightly, "you speak with surprising admiration for a lady. I admire what is admirable." Lady Beaumont's fan stirred. "How gallant! Miss Hartwell, you must be overwhelmed. Such notice from gentlemen is not common in your profession, I imagine." A few guests looked down. One smiled. Clara felt herself shrinking inside the borrowed muslin. Then Eleanor spoke quietly. "Lady Beaumont, Miss Hartwell has more claim to notice than most people at silence." Lady Beaumont's cheeks tightened. "Dear Lady Wycliffe, how moving your gratitude is. My memory may be injured," Eleanor said, "but my judgment is not." Alice's gaze moved to his mother, concern. Pride. The third course arrived. Roasted fowl, jellies, vegetables arranged like artwork, sauces Clara could not name. Food enough to feed every hungry girl on the street outside the bakery. Bread against banquet. The thought struck Clara so sharply that she nearly lost her breath. Only days ago she had given away her last crust beneath rain. Now she sat among people who used hunger as a joke and gratitude as a leash. Cressida waited until the servants had withdrawn. Then she struck properly. "Miss Hartwell, I hope you will forgive a question. We have all admired your devotion to Lady Wycliffe. Yet I find myself curious. Where were you employed before this remarkable accident?" Clara's fork stilled. Alistair said, "Lady Cressida." But Clara knew refusal would look like shame. "At a dressmaker's shop in Covent Garden. How industrious. And did your mistress give you a reference when you left?" The room changed, not dramatically. No one gasped. That would have been theatrical. Instead, eyes sharpened. A reference mattered. For a woman without family, it could be the thin paper wall between respectability and ruin. Clara's mouth went dry. "No, my lady." Cressida's expression became a masterpiece of concern. "Oh, one syllable, enough." Lady Beaumont leaned in slightly. "How unfortunate." Lord Edmund looked down as if saddened. Clara understood too late. They had arranged it. Every compliment, every moment, Edmund had made himself seen admiring her. Now the absence of a reference would become a story. Why had she been dismissed? Why had Lord Edmund noticed her? Had she encouraged him? Had she used the dowager's illness? Had she placed herself where pity could lift her? Cressida did not need to say all of it. Society preferred to complete cruelty for itself. Whispers moved, soft, silken, deadly. Clara sat very still. She had been cold in the rain. She had been hungry in the street. But nothing had made her feel as exposed as that room. Her poverty had been turned into evidence, her kindness into suspicion, her silence into confession. Alistair rose. The chair moved back with a sound like thunder. Every face turned. His expression was terrible. Not loud. Not uncontrolled. Worse. He looked like a man about to end something permanently. But before he could speak, Eleanor Wycliffe rose. Her hand trembled on the table. Clara reached for her. My lady, the dowager, stood slowly, old, fragile, pale from illness. Yet in that moment, she seemed taller than every person in the room. My memory wandered in the rain, she said. Her voice trembled, then steadied. But I remember enough, no one moved. Lady Cressida's face lost a little colour. Eleanor looked down the table, her gaze passing over silk jewels, titles, and polite cruelty. This girl fed me when ladies in silk turned their faces away. The words struck the room. Clara's throat tightened painfully. Eleanor continued. Clara Hartwell gave me the only food she possessed. She wrapped me in her shawl while the street walked past. She stayed beside me when no one knew my name. Her hand found Clara's shoulder. If she is not welcome in this room, then neither am I. A deep silence, the kind that follows truth when lies have been too comfortable. Lady Beaumont looked as if she had swallowed vinegar. Cressida lowered her eyes. Lord Edmund's smile vanished. At the head of the table, Alistair remained standing. His face had changed. The fury was still there, but beneath it was something else, something Clara could not bear to name. He looked at his mother, then at Clara, then at Lord Edmund Haverford, he said. The room went colder. Edmund attempted a laugh. My lord, you will leave Wycliffe House. The words fell calmly. That made them more devastating. Edmund's brows rose. I beg your pardon? You heard me, my dear Wycliffe. Surely there has been some misunderstanding. There has, Alistair said. You misunderstood my silence for tolerance. Lady Beaumont shifted. Lord Wycliffe, this is hardly. Alistair did not look at her. Your carriage will be called. Edmund's pleasant face hardened beneath the postish. I have done nothing to deserve insult. No, Alistair said. You have done something worse. You have behaved in a manner too cowardly to confess and too obvious to ignore. The table held its breath. Edmund looked at Clara. For one brief second, hatred showed through charm. Then he bowed. As you wish. He turned and walked from the dining room. No one followed. No one spoke. The door closed behind him. The dinner continued only because society had trained everyone present to survive discomfort by pretending it did not exist, but the evening was ruined. Not loudly ruined in stiff smiles. Ruined in Lady Cressida's silence. Ruined in Clara's hands trembling beneath the tablecloth where no one could see. After the ladies withdrew, Clara slipped away. She did not go upstairs. She could not face the small blue room, could not face Florence's pity, could not face the borrowed mirror and the borrowed gown and the borrowed place she had foolishly allowed herself to occupy. She found the conservatory instead. It was cool and dim, filled with dark leaves, sleeping orange trees, and moonlight caught in the glass ceiling. Beyond the windows, the garden lay silver and still. Clara stood beside a potted myrtle and pressed her hands to her mouth. She would not cry. Not here, not where tears might be found and discussed, but her breath shook. The humiliation returned in fragments, bakery scraps, no reference. How fortunate, usefulness, ambition, expectation. She had given bread. They had made it ugly. The door opened behind her. Clara turned quickly, wiping at her cheek before any tear could betray her. Viscount Wycliffe stood in the doorway. For once he did not look severe, he looked stricken. I beg your pardon, he said. Clara almost laughed. The words were too polite for the wound. For what, my lord? You did not ask whether I had a reference. I allowed the question to be asked in my house. You cannot command every tongue. I can command my table. She looked away. Moonlight lay pale across her face. They were right about one thing. His expression sharpened. No, I know enough to object. Clara turned back to him. I do not belong among them. His answer came immediately. Neither do half of them. The honesty startled her. He stepped farther into the conservatory, not close enough to frighten, close enough that the cold between them felt less like distance and more like restraint. Miss Hartwell, I should have protected you sooner. Take me. After my mother rose when she should have been resting. After you had already been made to stand trial in silk and candlelight. Clara's lips trembled. She hated that he saw it. I have stood trial before. My lord, poor girls often do. We are always defending ourselves against things we have not done. His face darkened. That will not happen here again. The promise was too dangerous, not because she doubted it, because she wanted to believe it. Why does it matter so much, she whispered. He went still. The question had escaped her. Now it stood between them. Why did her shame anger him? Why did her tears trouble him? Why had his voice changed when he spoke her name? Why had he looked at Edmund as if the man had touched something forbidden? Alistair did not answer at once. Outside, a branch brushed the glass inside. Candlelight from the hall reached the conservatory floor in a thin golden line. He looked down at her hand, the hand that had fed his mother, the hand still marked by needlework. Then slowly he reached for it. He did not seize. He did not command. He waited, giving her time to refuse. Clara did not move away. His gloved fingers closed around hers with careful restraint. It was a small touch, yet it held more feeling than any speech Lord Edmund had ever given. Alistair's voice lowered. It matters because I have spent years recognizing falsehood in every gracious room in London. His thumb moved once against the edge of her glove, and then you appeared in the rain and gave away the only thing you had. Clara could not breathe properly. My lord, Alistair. The name fell softly, too intimate for the space between them. Clara's eyes lifted to his. For one suspended moment, The world outside the conservatory seemed to vanish. There was no Cressida, no dinner, no rank, no marble hall, no gossip waiting behind doors. Only a feared viscount who looked suddenly afraid of his own heart, and a poor seamstress who had been hungry long before she gave away bread. Then voices sounded in the corridor. Lady Beaumont, clear, carrying intentional. Of course everyone will be delighted. The connection between our families has long been expected. A union between dear Cressida and Lord Wycliffe would settle matters beautifully. Clara's hand slipped from Alistair's. The warmth vanished. Alistair turned toward the door, his face hardening at once. But Clara had already heard enough. A union, Cressida and Lord Wycliffe, long expected, settle matters. The words entered Clara like cold water. Of course there was an understanding. Of course, women like Lady Cressida did not fight battles over houses they had no claim to. Of course, Lady Beaumont did not speak of family connection without reason. Of course, Alistair Wycliffe's anger, gratitude, and concern could exist beside duty. Men of his rank did not marry girls found in the rain. They protected them, perhaps, rewarded them, perhaps, remembered them kindly when they passed into some quieter life, but they married land, debt, alliance, expectation. Clara stepped back. Miss Hartwell, Alistair said. His voice had changed, urgent now, but she curtsied because it was safer than breaking. My lord. Clara, the use of her name nearly undid her. She forced herself to look at him. Lady Wycliffe may need me. I should return upstairs. He looked as though he wished to say something that would alter the night completely. But the corridor voices drew nearer, and Alistair Wycliffe, a man trained from birth to control scandal before feeling, hesitated. Only for a heartbeat it was enough. Clara left the conservatory. She walked with her chin level past Lady Beaumont, whose smile widened when she saw her face, past Lady Cressida, who stood beside her mother in silver sill as the blaze, past the servants carrying trays of untouched sweets up the staircase, along the candlelit corridor, into the small blue room where the fire had burned low. Only then did Clara press both hands against her heart. No sound came out. That made it downstairs in the conservatory. Alistair stood alone. His hand still remembered hers. His mother had defended Clara before the world. He had banished Edmund from his house. He had nearly spoken the truth. He had no right to speak. And now, because of a carefully placed sentence from Lady Beaumont, Clara Hartwell believed he belonged to another woman outside. London slept beneath mist and moonlight. Inside Wycliffe House, rumour had found its sharpest knife, and by morning it would begin to cut. By morning, the whisper had left Wycliffe House. By noon it had entered drawing rooms. By evening it had become almost fact. That was how London worked. Truth walked. Rumour rode in a carriage. The servants heard it first from a footman who had accompanied Lady Pembroke home after the dinner. He had heard it from Lady Pembroke's maid, who had heard it while brushing out her mistress's hair, who had heard it from Lady Beaumont herself before the last carriage had even rolled away from Wycliffe House. There was an understanding. Not a formal announcement, of course, not yet. One must allow great families to move delicately. But everyone knew. Lord Wycliffe and Lady Cressida Beaumont, a match long expected, a union between proud houses, an arrangement that would settle matters beautifully. By breakfast, the phrase had travelled from the servants' hall to the upper corridors. By luncheon, it had reached Florence Westbrook, who found Clara in the dowager's sitting room folding a lap blanket with hands too careful to be calm. Florence shut the door behind her. Miss Hartwell. Clara did not look up. I know. Florence's face tightened. You heard? I heard enough last night. That is not the same as knowing. Clara smoothed the blanket again. There was already no crease in it, but her hands needed occupation. If they stopped, they might spoke plainly. Lady Beaumont speaks whatever best serves Lady Beaumont. Clara tried to smile. It failed. Do not defend me from sense, Florence. I am defending you from cruelty dressed as sense. Clara looked toward the window outside. The morning was pale and cold. London roofs lay beneath were shops, market, crossings, alleys, and girls looking for work with no reference in their pockets. That world had been frightening. This one was worse, because here for a little while, Clara had forgotten to expect nothing. The conservatory returned to her in fragments. Alistair's hand reaching for hers, his voice lowering. The way he had said Alistair, not Lord, my lord, Alistair. For one suspended moment, she had allowed her heart to believe that names could cross distances, titles could not. Then Lady Beaumont's voice had cut through the corridor. A union between dear Cressida and Lord Wycliffe, the connection between our families, long expected, settle matters beautifully. Clara had been foolish, not wicked, not scheming, and poor girls dearly for foolish hope. Lady Wycliffe is asking for you, Florence said softly. Clara nodded. I will go at once. She lifted the blanket. Florence stepped closer. Miss Hartwell, has his lordship spoken to you? Clara's fingers tightened on the wool. No, then you do not know his mind. I know his silence. Florence had no answer for that, neither did Clara. Silence could be explained in 100 noble ways. Duty, timing, prudence, family complication, estate pressure, social expectation. But to the heart receiving it, silence had only one sound: rejection. Clara entered Eleanor's chamber a few minutes later. The dowager was sitting near the fire, wrapped in ivory wool, a silver tray of untouched tea beside her. Her face brightened as soon as Clara appeared. "There you are." "Yes, my lady." "You were slow this morning. I beg your pardon." Eleanor studied her. The old confusion had receded more each day, but not enough to dull the instincts of a mother. She saw what Clara tried to hide. "You have been crying." "No, my lady." Eleanor lifted one brow. "Child, I have been a wife, a mother, and a woman in society." Clear not waste her gaze. "I am only tired." "That is not the same as unhurt." The words nearly undid her. Clara crossed the room and picked up the teacup, though Eleanor had not asked for it. "Your tea will grow cold, so let it, my lady. Is it Cressida?" Clara went still. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the shawl. "I thought so. There is nothing to say. There is always something to say when Lady Cressida Beaumont is pleased." Clara almost smiled. Then the ache returned. "It is not my place to speak of Lady Cressida." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "It appears everyone else has taken that liberty." Clara set the teacup down. For a moment she could not continue pretending. "They say she will marry Lord Wycliffe." Eleanor's expression changed. Not with surprise. With anger. Old, aristocratic, beautifully restrained. "Who says this? Everyone will, soon enough. Did my son say it?" Clara looked down. "No." "Did he ask you to believe gossip over the evidence of your own heart?" Clara's breath caught. "My heart is not evidence, my lady. No, it is a witness, and often more honest than society." Clara closed her eyes. "I cannot remain here if it is true." Eleanor reached for her hand. "I cannot sit beside you while she looks at me as though I have stolen what was always hers. I cannot be pitied by servants and watched by guests and kept near a man who belongs to another woman." Eleanor's hand trembled. "My son does not belong to Cressida Beaumont." Clara wanted to believe it. That was the danger. Wanting made the wound deeper. "Then why does he not say so?" Eleanor had no answer, and because she had no answer, Clara's heart broke a little more. Downstairs, Alistair Wycliffe was not idle. He was in the library with Mr. Henry Grantham, the estate steward, and a desk covered in account books, letters, and 2 folded notes collected from discreet hands below stairs. Grantham stood near the fire, posture quiet, expression grave. "I would not have disturbed your lordship without cause. You never do." Grantham inclined his head. One note was carried by Lady Cressida's maid to Lord Edmund Haverford before the dinner. The other was delivered from Lady Beaumont's carriage after the company departed. Alistair opened the first note. There were few words. "Make certain he is seen admiring her before the table turns." His face hardened. He opened the second. "Excellent work. Her lack of reference will do the rest. Cressida must not be displaced by a charity seamstress." The paper lowered slowly in his hand. Grantham watched him. "It appears the humiliation was arranged." "Yes," Alistair said softly. "It appears so. The staff also reports Lady Beaumont has been allowing visitors to believe there is a settled understanding between your lordship and Lady." Cressida's jaw tightened. "There is no settled understanding." "No, my lord." The steward did not move. His silence was not accusation. That made it more powerful. Alistair looked up. "Speak plainly." Grantham folded his hands behind his back. "Falsehood often grows in the space honest men leave empty." The words landed cleanly. Alistair's eyes darkened. "You think I have been silent too long?" "I think Lady Beaumont has made use of your silence." Alistair turned toward the window. The garden beyond lay bare beneath winter light. He could see in memory Edmund lifting Clara's gloved hand. He could see Clara's face in the conservatory, wounded but still proud. He could hear Lady Beaumont's voice slicing the night open. He had intended to handle the Beaumonts properly, quietly, without public humiliation. Months before Eleanor's disappearance, there had been discussions, not promises, not affection, not even a true courtship. The kind of preliminary family conversations that occurred when 2 houses saw possible advantage in one another. The Beaumonts had old connections. They also had debt, a great deal of it. One debt in particular had concerned him. A note tied to an old Wycliffe estate investment during his father's final illness. Lady Beaumont had hinted, delicately and repeatedly, that a refusal now might expose unfortunate papers, confuse old reputations, and distress Eleanor. Alistair had not feared scandal for himself, but his mother had already suffered enough. So he had sent for Mr. Percival Langford, the family solicitor, to examine every document before he publicly severed the Beaumont expectation. He had believed silence would prevent harm. Instead, silence had sharpened the knife against Clara. A knock came. Mrs. Vale appeared. "Mr. Percival Langford has arrived, my lord." Alistair turned at once. "Show him in." Mr. Langford entered with a leather case beneath his arm, his spectacles misted from the cold. He was a thin, precise man whose loyalty to the Wycliffe family expressed itself through documents, seals, and carefully chosen pauses. "My lord." Langford. "Tell me you have found something worth my mother's peace." "I believe I have found something worth Miss Hartwell's protection." Alistair stilled. Grantham looked up sharply. Mr. Langford placed the leather case on the desk and withdrew an aged document wrapped in blue ribbon. This was attached to the late Viscount's private testament, not the principal will, a codicil. It appears to have been written after Lady Wycliffe fell ill some years ago during a visit to the country. Your father was deeply shaken by how vulnerable her ladyship had been. Alistair said nothing. The mention of his father always entered him like an old wound touched by cold. Langford continued, the codicil states that any person, regardless of rank or family, who preserves Lady Wycliffe from mortal abandonment or unlawful harm, shall receive Wycliffe protection, a modest yearly allowance, and the right to occupy Roseford Cottage on the northern estate for life, should such protection be needed. Grantham's face changed. Alistair reached for the document. His eyes moved over the lines, unmistakable, strict, elegant, final. Anyone who saves Eleanor must never find the world colder for having done so. Alistair read that line twice, then a third time. His throat tightened. Langford watched him quietly. I do not believe the late Viscount meant charity, my lord. He meant honour. Alistair's hand closed over the paper. And Miss Hartwell qualifies without question. The physician's report, your footman's testimony, and her ladyship's own account are more than sufficient. Miss Hartwell is owed protection by the Wycliffe name, whether or not society likes the shape of it. Alistair looked toward the door. For the first time that day, something like relief moved through him. He would show Clara. He would explain everything. The false engagement. The Beaumont debt mistake, not as command, not as reward, as truth. But truth had already lost ground. Upstairs, Lady Cressida Beaumont had come calling. She had been admitted because rank still opened doors that character should have closed. She found Clara in the smaller passage outside Eleanor's chamber, carrying a folded shawl. Cressida wore pale blue, a bridal colour, soft and suggestive. How industrious you remain, Miss Hartwell. Clara curtsied. Lady Cressida. I hope you are not avoiding me after last night. That would be unfortunate. I dislike discomfort among people who must soon share a household. Clara's heart tightened. I beg your pardon. Cressida looked mildly surprised. Has no one told you? Clara said nothing. Cressida drew a folded paper from her reticule. I suppose Lord Wycliffe is too considerate to discuss family arrangements before they are formally. A noble quality, though sometimes confusing to those outside the circle. She held out the paper. Clara should not have taken it. She did. The note was in Lady Beaumont's hand. The settled Wycliffe match must not be delayed beyond the assembly. Cressida's position must be made impossible to question. Clara read the words once, then settled. Match. Cressida's position. Her fingers went cold. Lady Cressida watched every change in her face. I do not show you this to wound you. That was a lie so smooth it almost shone. I show you because it is kinder that you understand. Men like Lord Wycliffe may admire unusual acts. They may even become briefly attached to the person who performed them. Gratitude can be very warm, Miss Hartwell, especially in a house recovering from fear. Clara lifted her eyes. Cressida stepped closer. But men like Alistair marry women who can stand beside them without explanation. Women whose names do not require defense. Women who are not introduced through accident, illness, and pity. The corridor seemed to narrow. Clara heard distant footsteps below. A clock ticking somewhere behind the wall. The soft rustle of Cressida's blue silk. You are mistaken, Clara said. Though the words had almost no strength, Cressida's smile was gentle. No, you are. That hurt more than the insults. Because it sounded almost like pity. Take care, Miss Hartwell. If you remain after the announcement, people will be less forgiving. They will say you stayed because you hoped to be chosen. They will laugh at you for mistaking kindness for intention. Clara felt the paper tremble in her hand. Cressida reached for it and folded it neatly again. I advise you to leave with dignity while you still can. Then she walked away, not hurriedly. Victor's did not hurry. Clara remained in the corridor for several seconds after Cressida disappeared. Then she turned and entered the small blue room. Her bundle was still there, the same cloth bundle she had carried through the rain. It looked smaller now, poorer, more honest. She took it from the chair and untied it with numb fingers. 2 shifts, the cracked comb, the little book of sermons, the letters. Her life could still fit into one cloth square. That somehow made the decision easier. Florence found her packing. No, Clara did not turn. Florence, no, absolutely not. I must go. You must breathe first. I have been breathing. It has not helped. Florence crossed the room and shut the door firmly. Did Cressida speak to you? Clara's silence answered. That woman is a bell with poison for a tongue. She showed me a note. A note can lie. Can silence lie too? Florence stopped. Clara tied the first corner of her bundle. I cannot remain here as a pitied creature in the house of the man I love while another woman prepares to become its mistress. The confession came out simply. That made Florence's eyes fill. Oh, Clara. Clara tied the second corner. I have said it once. I shall not say it again. I will not beg for a truth he has chosen not to give. Pride can be a lonely road. So can hope. Florence turned away, pressing her hand briefly to her mouth. When she faced Clara again, something had changed. Loyalty had overcome fear. If you leave by the front door, they will stop you. If you leave by the servants' passage after supper, they may not see. Clara looked at her. I cannot ask that of you. You did not. Florence, you could lose your position, and you could lose yourself if you stay. The words settled between the floor and the small drawer beside the bed and took out a dark cloak. It is mine, take it. No, yes. I cannot take your cloak. You can return it when you are safe enough to argue with me properly. Clara almost laughed. Instead, a tear fell. Florence pretended not to see. She pressed a few coins into Clara's hand, saved from wages, not much. Enough for a place on the night coach if you bargain with a decent driver. There is a coaching inn on the North Road, respectable enough. Ask for Mrs. Pritchie knew my aunt. I will repay you, I know. Clara gripped her hand. For a moment neither girl spoke. In a house of marble and whispers, they stood together as two poor women who understood exactly how much one cloak and a few coins could mean. That evening Clara sat with Eleanor one last time. She did not tell the dowager. She could not. Eleanor was tired after Cressida's visit, and half drifting in a chair, Clara read softly from the sermon book her mother had loved, though the words blurred twice. When she's to leave, Eleanor, go far. Clara froze. The room seemed to know. I shall not. My lady, she whispered. It was the first lie she had ever told Eleanor Wycliffe. It hurt like one. At the servant's stair after supper, Florence waited with the cloak. No trunk, she whispered. No sound. Keep your head down past the kitchen court. Clara nodded. Her throat was too tight for speech. Florence embraced her quickly. Stand straight wherever you go. I will. Then she left. Through the passage. Down the narrow stair, past the kitchen where the last pots were being scrubbed. Across the damp stone court. Through a servant's gate that opened onto a side lane behind Wycliffe House. No carriage waited. No title protected her. No marble floor reflected her steps. Only London. Here Clara pulled Florence Classic around her shoulders and walked away. Upstairs, in the library, Alistair Wycliffe was reading his father's codicil for the 4th time when Mrs. Vale entered without waiting for permission. That alone told him something was wrong. My lord, he rose. Is it? Mrs. Vale's face had lost colour. Miss Hartwell is gone. The room changed. Not visibly. The fire still burned. The candles still stood straight. Mr. Langford, still his spectacles in one hand. Grantham still waited beside the desk. But Alistair felt the floor vanish beneath all of it. Gone where? We do not know. His voice lowered. When? Within the last hour. Alistair looked toward the door, then back at Mrs. Vale, who saw her leave. No one spoke. Then Florence stepped into the doorway. Her face was pale. I helped her, my lord. Mrs. Vale turned sharply. Florence. Alistair's eyes fixed on the maid. What? Florence swallowed. Then, with tears standing in her eyes and courage holding her upright, she answered. Because she believed you had chosen Lady Cressida. Because Lady Cressida made sure she believed it. Because every room in this house was beginning to break her heart. And no one with power to tell her she was wrong. Alistair stood perfectly still. Florence trembled but continued. She would not ask you. She thought silence was your answer. Alistair's face changed. The control cracked. Not loudly. I never chose Cressida. Florence's voice broke. Then you should have said so before. Miss Hartwell had to break her heart in silence. No one moved. Mr. Langford lowered his eyes. Grantham looked toward the window. Mrs. Vale pressed her lips together, as if holding back either grief or reprimand. Alistair turned to the desk. The codicil lay open beneath candlelight. Protection. Honor, the Wycliffe name. All of it had come too late for the girl who had never asked for any of it. He lifted the document and folded it carefully. Then he reached for his coat. Have the carriage brought round? Grantham stepped forward. My lord, the roads are worsening. There is rain coming again. Then we ride before it breaks. Alistair looked at Florence. The North Road, she whispered. There is a coaching inn. Alistair nodded once. His face had become calm again. But this was not the cold calm of suspicion. This was the stillness of a man whose heart had finally understood the cost of delay. Send riders to the south and east gates. Grantham with me. Langford, remain here in case she returns. Mrs. Vale, no one speaks of this outside the household. Yes, my lord. Alistair stopped at the door. Florence looked at him. For a moment, servant and master stood divided by rank, but joined by the same fear. She left standing. Do not bring her back, as if she has been dragged. Alistair's expression shifted. Pain, respect, promise. No, he said. If she returns standing. Then he was gone. Outside, thunder muttered over London. The first rain struck the windows of Wycliffe House. And somewhere beyond the lamps, beyond the gates, beyond the protection she had earned before she knew its name, Clara Hartwell walked alone into the storm. She did not know that Lord Edmund Haverford had already learned of her departure. She did not know that Lady Cressida's maid had sent word before the servants' gate had fully closed. She did not know that the same world which had ignored an old woman in the rain was now preparing to hunt the girl who had saved her. All Clara knew was that she had left before she could be left, and behind her for the first time in years Viscount Wycliffe forgot caution. He forgot propriety, he forgot every rule that had taught him to move slowly when reputation was at stake because Clara was alone, because Clara was vulnerable, because Clara had believed his silence more than his heart, and because if he did not find her before his enemies did, the girl with the bread might be destroyed by the very kindness that had brought her into his life. The road out of London did not feel like escape, felt like exile. Clara Hartwell walked beneath a sky swollen with rain, Florence's dark cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders, her small bundle pressed to her side as if it contained more than linen, letters, and a crack-tagged her lay Wycliffe House, marble floors, candlelit corridors, a warm fire in the small blue room, Lady Wycliffe's trembling hand reaching for hers. Alistair's voice in the conservatory, low and dangerous, saying his Christian name as if he were offering her something the world would never permit her to keep. Ahead lay the North Road, cold, open, uncertain. Every step carried Clara farther from the only place that had frightened and comforted her in equal measure. She had left before she could be dismissed. That was what she told herself. She had left before Lady Cressida Beaumont could stand as mistress of Wycliffe House and find Clara still lingering like an unpaid debt of gratitude. She had left before Alistair Wycliffe's silence could become a formal announcement in the newspapers. She had left while she still possessed enough dignity to walk out by her own choice, but dignity was poor shelter against rain. The wind rose near the edge of the city, driving mist across the road in silver sheets. Carriage lamps blurred in the distance, wheels struck puddles. Hooves clattered over stone, then mud, then the rougher track leading north. Clara lowered her head and kept walking. She had money enough for one place on a coach if fortune was kind, perhaps a seat beside a farmer's wife, perhaps a place near the luggage if the driver had pity, perhaps if Mrs. Pritchard at Florence's inn remembered Florence's aunt, Clara might be allowed to sit in the kitchen until morning. After that she would seek work. A companion's place, perhaps. She could read aloud. She could sew beautifully. She could sit patiently with the old and the ill. She could be quiet. She could be useful. Useful had always been safer than beloved. The thought struck her so sharply that she stopped walking. Beloved, she had no right to that word. Not in connection with him. Not in connection with a viscount whose life had been built before she was born, whose name sat in legal books, whose future had likely been discussed in drawing rooms long before Clara knew what hunger meant. Alistair Wycliffe had been kind in the manner of proud men unused to gentleness. He had given orders for supper, for stockings, for a fire, for her protection at dinner. He had defended her when the room turned cruel. He had taken her hand in the conservatory. But kindness could look like affection to a girl who had gone too long without either. Clara forced herself onward. The rain began properly just before she saw the inn. It came hard and slanting, drumming against the road, turning coach ruts into black channels. By the time the sign came into view, swinging violently above the yard, Clara's bonnet was soaked through and her skirt clung heavily to her legs. The King's Lantern, a respectable enough coaching inn set back from the road, with stable lamps glowing through rain and the smell of horses, wet straw, smoke and ale drifting from the yard. Clara stepped beneath the archway. A groom glanced at her, then at her bundle. "Looking for kitchen entrance?" The words were not cruel. Clara lifted her chin. "I was told to ask for Mrs. Pritchard." The groom's expression changed slightly. "She's inside, mind the puddle." Inside, the inn was loud with weather and travellers. A fire roared in the common room. Men in damp coats crowded near it, steaming gently. A pair of women with market baskets argued over the cost of passage. A child slept with his head against a trunk. Boots struck the floor. Tankards knocked against tables. Somewhere in the back, someone laughed too loudly. Clara stood near the door, suddenly aware of every drop falling from her cloak onto the boards. The innkeeper's wife came from behind the counter. A stout woman with sensible eyes, rolled sleeves, and a face that had seen enough hardship to recognize it without ceremony. "You're dripping half the road onto my floor. I beg your pardon," Clara said quickly. The woman looked her over. "Name?" "Clara Hartwell." "Florence Westbrook sent me. She said you knew her aunt." Mrs. Pritchard's expression softened by one careful degree. "Florence Westbrook. Little Flo from Marylebone?" "Yes, she always did have more heart than caution." Clara said nothing, Mrs. Pritchard glanced toward the crowded room, then lowered her voice. "You need a bed if there is one cheap enough. There is not tonight. Storm has held 2 coaches already." Clara's stomach dropped. "But you can sit in the kitchen till morning if you keep out from underfoot." Relief nearly weakened her knees. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. I will put you to peeling turnips if I must. I can peel turnips." Mrs. Pritchard turned toward the back passage. Then the inn door opened again. Rain blew in. So did the past. Lord Edmund Haverford stepped inside. For one impossible moment, Clara could not understand what she was seeing. He should have been in London, at a card table beside Lady Cressida, laughing softly over the wound they had left behind. Not here. Not at the coaching inn. Not with rain shining on his hat and a smile already arranged on his once. His eyes found Clara at once, Miss Hartcold. Pritchard looked between them. You know this gentleman? Clara's mouth went dry. Barely, Edmund smiled. How severe. After all we have shared at Wycliffe House. Clara stepped back. Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. Edmund removed his gloves slowly. Do not alarm yourself. I have come as a friend. Clara said nothing. She had learned by now that Lord Edmund's friendliness always entered a room. Before the knife, he came closer. Not too close, he was too clever for the gentleman. Did not need force when reputation could do the work for him. You left rather abruptly, he said. I am free to leave any house in which I am not employed, of course, though society may wonder why you slipped out through a servant's gate. Clara's fingers tightened around her bundle. I owe society no explanation. No, Edmund said softly, but society invents explanations when denied one. Mrs. Pritchard crossed her arms. Is this gentleman troubling you? Edmund gave her a charming glance. Madam, I am trying to prevent trouble. That is often what trouble calls itself. For a moment, Clara almost loved her. Edmund's smile did not falter, but his eyes cooled. I require only a brief word with Miss Hartwell in public, if that eases your mind. It does not, Mrs. Pritchard said. But Clara knew there would be no escape from the conversation. Not if Edmund had followed her here, not if Cressida's maid had sent word, not if the trap had already stretched beyond Wycliffe House. She will remain by the fire. Mrs. Pritchard gave a short nod, then moved away only far enough to pretend not to listen. Edmund stood beside Clara near the edge of the common room. Firelight touched his face, making him look handsome and harmless. He was neither. I will speak plainly, he said, at last. Careful, Miss Hartwell. Pride suits ladies better when it is inherited. Clara swallowed the reply that rose in her throat. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. You are in a delicate position. No, I am in reference. Without family. Without money sufficient to travel far. Without anyone of consequence willing to claim you once Lord Wycliffe remembers what is owed to his rank. Clara forced herself to breathe. The words hurt because they were built from truths. That was what made them wicked. Edmund unfolded the paper. I can help you, I doubt that. You should not. I know a respectable household in Bath that requires a companion, quiet work, modest wages, far from London, far from gossip. Clara stared at the paper. What do you want? There it was, the knife revealed. Edmund lowered his voice. You will sign that you exaggerated the circumstances of Lady Wycliffe's rescue, that your connection to the household was encouraged by your own ambition, that my attentions, such as they were not unwelcome. Clara's face went still. No, you have not heard the advantages. I have heard enough. His eyes hardened. You are very young. I am old enough to recognize a lie. You are alone. I was alone when I gave Lady Wycliffe bread, and see where that kindness has brought you. He leaned closer, voice soft and poisonous, to scandal, to humiliation, to a storm road with one bundle in your hands. Do not make the mistake of thinking virtue protects poor girls. It does not. Names protect them. Money protects them. Men protect them when they choose. Clara looked at him steadily. Then I shall remain unprotected before I protect myself with falsehood. For the first time, anger broke through his polish. You foolish little seamstress, the room did not hear. But Clara did every word. Do you imagine Wycliffe will marry you? Is that the dream? That the great Alistair Wycliffe will place his mother's charity case beside him in society and call it love? Clara felt the blow. She refused to show the wound. No, good. Then your mind is not entirely gone. I never thought he would marry me. That was almost true, almost. Edmund smiled again, then sign. No. His voice dropped. Listen carefully. Gentlemen are believed. Poor girls are inspected. If I say you invited my admiration, there will be those who believe me. If Lady Cressida suggests you used the Dowager's confusion, there will be those who believe her. If Lady Beaumont allows the world to think you fled Wycliffe House because your scheme failed, there will be more than enough tongues to finish the story. Clara's hands had gone cold, not because she feared disgrace in an abstract way. She feared what disgrace did. A ruined reputation was not merely whispers. It was closed doors, lost work, landladies refusing rooms, employers dismissing applications, men assuming access, women withdrawing protection, a life narrowed until survival itself became suspect. Edmund placed the paper on the small table beside her. Sign. And I will send you away with enough money to begin again. Clara looked at the paper, then at the fire, then at Edmund. No, his face changed. Do you know what will happen to you? Yes, Clara said. Something difficult, but it will still be mine. He did not seize it roughly. He only touched her glove. That was enough. Clara pulled back. Mrs. Pritch stepped forward at once. Before she could speak, the inn door opened. This time the storm itself seemed to enter. The door struck the wall. Rain swept across the threshold. Every conversation in the common room faltered. A tall man stood there, black coat soaked, boots muddied from hard travel, hair darkened by rain, face carved from fury held under terrible control. Alistair Wycliffe had arrived. Behind him came Mr. Grantham and two Wycliffe servants equally rain-soaked, breathing hard from haste. The room knew rank before it knew name. Men straightened. The innkeeper came forward at once. A woman hushed her child. Clara could not move. Alistair's gaze found her in that first second. The fury in his face changed into something sharper, relief, so deep, so unguarded that Clara felt it cross the room before he spoke. Then his eyes moved to Edmund, the relief vanished. "Step away from—" Edmund recovered quickly. "My lord, what a dramatic entrance." "Step away from Miss Hartwell." The title struck the room. Miss Hartwell, not girl, not seamstress, not charity case, Miss Hartwell. Edmund smiled. "I was merely offering assistance. You were offering coercion." A murmur moved through the room. Edmund's eyes flicked to the travellers. The innkeeper, Mrs. Pritchard, the servants, witnesses, too many. Alistair stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not raise a hand. He did something far more dangerous. He spoke so every soul in the room could hear. "This woman saved the life of Dowager Viscountess Eleanor Wycliffe. She found my mother lost, feverish, and abandoned in the rain. She gave her the only food she possessed. She remained beside her when better-dressed people passed by." Clara's throat tightened. Edmund's jaw clenched. Alistair continued. "By the written command of my late father and by my own honour, Miss Clara Hartwell stands under the protection of the Wycliffe name." The inn fell silent. Alistair took a folded document from inside his coat. Rain had touched the outer edge, but it remained intact. "Mr. Percival Langford, solicitor to the Wycliffe family, has confirmed the legal authority. Any attempt to blacken Miss Hart's, extort a statement, or injure her reputation will be answered publicly and in law." Edmund's face went pale beneath the firelight. "You cannot mean to make a public matter of this. I would prefer it." The words were quiet, devastating. "For once, Lord Edmund, choose your next sentence as if consequences exist." No one breathed. Edmund looked around the room and understood the trap had turned. The common room was full of witnesses. The innkeeper had heard, Mrs. Pritchard had heard, the coach passengers, the servants had heard. Grantham had heard everything and would forget nothing. Edmund's smile returned, thinner than before. "There has clearly been a misunderstanding." "No," Alistair said. "There has been an exposure." A flush crawled up Edmund's neck. He reached for the paper on the table. Alistair's voice cut across the movement. Edmund froze. Grantham stepped forward and took the paper He read it once, then folded it with careful disgust. "Useful," he said. "Not Alistair. At Clara. You will regret this," he said. Alistair moved one step closer. "I advise you never to be found near Miss Hartwell again." Edmund looked as though he wished to answer. Then he saw the room watching. His courage, being social rather than moral, failed him. He bowed stiffly. No one returned the courtesy. He left through the rain. The door closed behind him. Only then did sound return to the inn. A man coughed. The child whispered a question. Pritchard muttered something unflattering about fine coats and rotten hearts. Clara stood beside the fire, unable to decide whether she was saved or undone. Alistair turned to her. The public authority left his face. What remained was quieter, more dangerous to her heart. Miss Hartwell, she looked at him. Lord, the formality hurt him. She saw it. Good, she thought wildly, then hated herself for it. "Are you harmed?" he asked. No, a pause. "Did he frighten you?" Clara looked at the paper in Grantham's hand. "Yes." Alistair's jaw tightened. "I am sorry," those words again, but this time they were not enough to soften her. "Why are you here?" He drew a breath. "To bring you home." "I have no home." The words landed between them. The common room suddenly felt too public. Alistair looked toward Mrs. Pritchard. "Is there a private parlour?" "There is," she said. "And the door remains open. For Miss Hartwell's comfort it shall." Mrs. Pritchard nodded once. "Then this way." The parlour was small and plain, with a fire, 2 chairs, and a table marked by old rings from tankards. The door remained open. Mrs. Pritchard hovered within sight. Grantham stood near the hall, far enough not to intrude. Clara sat only because her legs felt unreliable. Alistair remained standing. Rain dripped from his coat onto the floor. He looked less like the Viscount of Wycliffe here. No marble, no portraits, no servants waiting in perfect rows. Only a man, wet from the storm, facing a woman his silence had wounded. "Lady Cressida lied to you," he said. Clara stared at the fire. "She showed me a note. Her mother's presumption is not my promise. You did not deny it. I intended to." "When?" The question struck him. Clara looked up. "When, my lord? After the assembly? After every servant had heard? After every guest had congratulated her? After I had learned to stand beside her as some useful reminder of your family's gratitude?" "No." His voice was rough. "No, Clara." Her name in his mouth nearly broke her. She stood. "Do not call me that if you mean to send me back to watch you marry her. I am not marrying her." The words were clear, simple, too late. Clara searched his face. "You swear it?" "On my father first, then anger. Anger at him, at Cressida, at herself, at the fragile hope that rose even after being crushed. Then why did you let me believe it?" Alistair looked down. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed ashamed. There were old discussions between the families. Nothing settled, nothing promised. Lady Beaumont held a debt note tied to one of my father's final estate investments. She suggested that if I humiliated Cressida publicly, old matters might be exposed in ways that could distress my mother. Clara listened. I sent for Langford to untangle it properly. I thought if I moved carefully I could protect my mother's peace and your reputation from further gossip. He lifted his eyes. I was wrong. The honesty struck harder than defense would have. I thought silence was restraint, he said. It was cowardice wearing discipline. Clara's anger faltered. Alistair took one step closer, then stopped. He did not cross the last distance. I have spent years trusting control more than truth. Control does not comfort the wounded. It does not defend the innocent quickly enough. And it did not protect you. Clara's fingers tightened in the folds of Florence's cloak. Why does my reputation matter so much to you? The same question from the conservatory, but now there were no Beaumont voices to interrupt it. No silk shadows in the corridor. No duty standing between the answer and the wound. Alistair looked at her. Because somewhere between my suspicion and your courage, you became necessary to me. The room stilled. Clara forgot the storm, forgot the inn, forgot Mrs. Pritchard beyond the open door and Grantham in the hall. Necessary, not useful, not convenient, necessary. Alistair's voice lowered. At first, I thought I watched you because I feared deception. Then I thought I watched because my mother needed you. Then you stood in my library and told me that understanding a wound did not make it painless. His expression softened with something like pain. And I realized you had seen me more clearly than people who have known me for years. Clara could not speak, he continued. You owe me nothing. Not gratitude, not forgiveness, not trust, simply because I rode after you, but I am asking you to return. As what? The question trembled despite her effort. He did not flinch from it. As Clara Hartwell, the woman who saved my mother. The woman my father's own hand protected by law. The woman I failed once by silence and will not fail again by hesitation. Her eyes filled. I will not return to be hidden. No, I will not be pitied. I will not stand in corners while Lady Cressida smiles over me. His face hardened. Lady Cressida will have no power over you. She has society. I have truth. Society does not always care for truth. Then I will make it difficult for society to ignore. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek. I am tired, my lord. Alistair, he said, soft her head. I do not know if I can say that yet. The pain in his eyes was immediate, but he bowed his head. Then I will wait until you can. If you never can, I will still defend you. That undid her more than persuasion, because he did not demand the name. He did not demand forgiveness. He did not demand her return as proof that his apology had been accepted. He stood there, soaked from the storm, powerful enough to ruin men, and asked rather than commanded. Outside, thunder rolled over the road. Clara wiped her cheek. If I return, she said. I return standing. Alistair's answer came at once. Then I will stand beside you. The words were quiet, but they entered Clara's heart like a vow. For a moment, neither moved. Then Mrs. Pritchard appeared in the doorway, pretending very poorly that she had heard nothing. There is tea, she said, and dry cloths. And if his lordship drips any longer on my floor, I will charge the Wycliffe estate for damages. Alistair turned. To Clara's astonishment, something almost like a smile touched his mouth. I shall instruct Mr. Grantham to settle the account, Mrs. See that he does? Clara laughed, only once, small, shaken, real. Alistair looked at her as if that sound alone had repaid the storm. They did not return to London at once. The weather was too fierce. Mrs. Pritchard insisted Clara sit in the kitchen with tea, while a private room was prepared for her to rest under the protection of her locked door, and Alistair remained below with Grantham, speaking to no one unless necessary, guarding the inn as if it were a fortress. By dawn, the storm had weakened, the road steamed beneath grey light. A Wycliffe carriage arrived, sent ahead from London after the first rider's return. Clara stood beneath the inn archway, her bundle in her hands. Alistair approached. He did not take the bundle from her. He understood now. Some burdens had to be offered before they were carried. Ready? He asked. Clara looked toward the road. London waited, Wycliffe House waited. Lady Cressida waited, Lady Beaumont waited, Wisperhos waited, but so did Eleanor, the woman in the rain. The mother who had remembered bread when society forgot mercy. Clara lifted her chin. Yes. Alistair opened the carriage door. She stepped inside by her own strength. He followed, sitting across from her as he had on the first night, but everything was different now. Then, she had not known whether she was being rescued, questioned, or carried into destruction. Now she knew destruction was possible. She also knew she would not face it alone. As the carriage turned toward London, morning light broke weakly through the clouds. Alistair looked at Clara. Clara looked back. No promises were spoken, not yet. But between them lay something stronger than a whispered romance and more dangerous than gratitude, truth. And when Wycliffe House came into view, pale and severe beyond its iron gates, Clara did not lower her eyes. She had left through the servants' gate with a broken heart. She returned through the front gates with her name, her courage, and the protection she had earned before any viscount loved her. Inside, the Beaumonts were already preparing their next move, but this time Clara Hartwell would not enter as a frightened girl with no place. This time, the Viscount would stand beside her, and by nightfall London would begin to learn that the girl with the bread was not so easily ruined. London loved an assembly because an assembly allowed cruelty to wear diamonds. That evening, the great rooms of Lady Ravenshaw's townhouse blazed with candlelight. Carriages lined the street outside, their lamps glowing through the winter mist like watchful eyes. A footman stood beneath the awning. Silk slippers crossed polished steps. Jewels trembled at throats and wrists. Laughter floated out each time the doors opened, bright and delicate, as if no unkind thing had ever been said beneath a chandelier. Inside the ballroom was a sea of rank. Gold-framed mirrors reflected candle flames until the room seemed larger than truth. Musicians waited upon a raised platform. The floor had been polished to a dangerous shine. White flowers climbed the columns. Fans opened and closed like small, elegant wings. Everyone had come to dance, but not everyone had come for music. Some had come for the announcement. The rumoured Wycliffe announcement. For days, Lady Beaumont had fed society with hints. Nothing vulgar, nothing direct. Nothing that could be publicly denied without making the denier appear ungentlemanly, only carefully placed phrases. An understanding between them and the family, a long-expected union. Dear Cressida's future happiness, Lord Wycliffe's devotion to proper duty. And because London preferred a comfortable lie to an inconvenient silence, the rumour had grown strong enough to stand upright by itself. Lady Cressida Beaumont entered the ballroom dressed like victory. Her gown was pale blue silk, the colour of bridal expectation. Pearls lay at her throat, tiny diamonds glimmered in her dark hair. Her beauty was calm, practiced, almost luminous. Beside her, Lady Beaumont smiled as though the evening had already been decided. Guests moved toward them with eager faces. "My dear Lady Cressida, how radiant you look. Lady Beaumont, you must be so pleased. Such a fitting match if the whispers are true." Lady Cressida lowered her eyes with perfect modesty. One must not speak before matters are formally settled. The answer was a masterpiece. It denied nothing. Invited across the room, Lord Edmund Haverford stood near a column, outwardly composed and inwardly furious. He had returned to London before dawn, his pride bruised, his scheme exposed at the coaching inn, and his hatred sharpened by humiliation. But he still believed in society, and society, he believed, would choose silk over bread. He was not alone in that hope. Lady Beaumont leaned toward her daughter. "Stand calmly," she murmured behind her fan. "Whatever Lord Wycliffe intends, he cannot insult you publicly without insulting every family that believed this match was expected." Cressida's smile did not move. "He will not choose her before them." "No," Lady Beaumont said. "Men may be foolish in private. In public, they remember themselves." At that moment, the ballroom doors opened. Conversation shifted, then thinned, then stopped. Viscount Wycliffe had arrived. Alistair Wycliffe stood at the entrance in formal evening black, his white cravat immaculate, his expression cold enough to quiet a room without asking for silence. At his side stood his mother. Dowager Viscountess Eleanor Wycliffe had not attended an assembly since her ordeal in the rain. Her appearance alone sent a ripple through the room. She was pale, yes. Fragile, yes, but she stood upright, gloved hand resting lightly upon her son's arm, silver hair arranged beneath a lace cap, diamonds at her throat like drops of moonlight, and on Alistair's other arm stood Clara Hartwell. The room forgot to breathe. Clara felt the silence strike her body. Not because she had never been looked at before. She had been looked at in Wycliffe House, at the dinner table, in corridors, by servants who wondered whether she was fortunate or dangerous, by ladies who measured her gown and found her wanting. But this was different. This was London looking. The whole merciless world of titles, fortunes, whispers, and polished cruelty turned its face upon her at once. Clara wore ivory muslin, not borrowed this time. The gown had been chosen by Eleanor and altered by Florence with such care that every stitch seemed to hold loyalty. It was simple, elegant, and honest. To tried disguise past, no feathers pretended she had been born to such rooms. Her hair was arranged plainly, with a narrow ribbon of soft gold. She did not look like Lady Cressida Beaumont, she looked like Clara Hartwell, and tonight that was the point. Eleanor had said so while Florence fastened the final hook. "We are not dressing you as a lie, child. We are dressing the truth so that cowards must look at it." Now, Clara stood in the doorway, her hand resting on Alistair's arm, and every face in the ballroom understood that the truth had entered. Lady Cressida saw her. For one sharp instant, hatred broke through beauty. Then the smile returned. Lady Beaumont's fan stopped moving. Alistair leaned slightly toward Clara, his voice too low for anyone else. Clara kept her eyes forward. "I return standing, and I stand beside you." The words steadied her. They moved into the ballroom. The crowd parted, not warm yet. Rank recognized rank. Power recognized power. And whatever society thought of Clara Hartwell, no one in that room dared deny the authority of the man whose arm held hers with public, deliberate respect. Is that the seamstress, the girl from the rain? Surely not on his arm. Has Lady Cressida been misled? Or have we? Lady Cressida stepped forward before uncertainty could damage her. "My dear Lady Wycliffe," she said, voice sweet and bright, How delighted we are to see you restored. Are you? The question was mild. The room heard it anyway. Cressida's smile tightened. Of course, we have all been so concerned. How fortunate, Eleanor said. Concern is most elegant when witnesses are present. A dangerous little silence followed. Lady Beaumont moved in quickly. Lord Wycliffe, she said, offering the full warmth of social command. We were beginning to fear you might not come. Cressida has been receiving so many good wishes this evening. Alistair's expression did not change. For what? Lady Beaumont blinked. For the future, naturally. Whose future? The fan in her hand trembled once. Cressida stepped closer. My lord. Perhaps this is not the place. No, it is exactly the place. The falsehood has been encouraged publicly. It will end publicly. The words fell like a glass breaking on marble. Around them, guests turned openly now. No one pretended not to listen. Lady Beaumont's face paled beneath powder. Lord Wycliffe, you cannot mean to embarrass my daughter. I mean to correct a lie. Cressida's eyes flashed. A lie? Alistair looked at her fully. There was never an engagement between us. There was never a promise. There was never consent. There were preliminary discussions between families, nothing more. Any claim beyond that was presumption. The room erupted into whispers. Lady Beaumont's lips parted. Cressida stood motionless, the blue silk that had seemed triumphant moments before suddenly looking like evidence. Lord Edmund shifted near the column. Alistair saw him. So did Mr. Henry Grantham, standing discreetly near the edge of the room, and so did Mr. Percival Langford, who had arrived with a leather case and the calm expression of a man who trusted paper more than gossip. Cressida recovered first. Then I have been mistaken, she said softly, turning her face just enough for nearby guests to pity her and publicly humiliated for it. Lady Beaumont touched her daughter's arm. My poor child, there it was, the reversal, the wounded noblewoman, the cruel viscount, the poor girl standing too near him. Society loved nothing more than a woman humiliated unless it could blame another woman for it. Cressida's gaze moved to Clara. Perhaps we all understand now, she said, her voice trembling with false dignity. Influence can be exerted in many ways. Gratitude can become confusion. A vulnerable mother's affection can be used against her son. Clara felt the room turn. Not fully, but enough, Cressida continued, each word placed like a pin. I do not accuse Miss Hartwell. I am sure she did not intend to rise so high on one charitable act, but dear Lady Wycliffe has been unwell. We must be careful not to mistake fevered attachment for judgment. A murmur passed through the ballroom. Clara's hand tightened on Alistair's sleeve. He moved to speak, but Eleanor Wycliffe stepped forward. Not far, only one step. It was enough. No, she said. Her voice trembled, the room quieted. Eleanor lifted her chin. I have been spoken of as though I were a cracked porcelain cup, fragile, decorative, unreliable. Lady Wycliffe, Lady Beaumont began. Eleanor turned her eyes upon her. Do not interrupt me, Lady Beaumont. I have listened to foolishness all evening, and my patience is not as strong as my memory. A few guests drew in soft breaths. Clara stared at her. Alistair's face tightened with concern, but he did not stop her. This moment belonged to a ballroom. I forgot the street, she said. Her voice was thin at first, then steadier. I forgot the hour. I forgot the way home. I forgot the names of roads I have passed. For 40 years, silence deepened. But I never forgot the girl with the bread. Clara's eyes filled at once. Eleanor looked at her, just once, then continued. I was lost in the rain. I was cold. I was frightened beyond dignity. My bonnet was ruined. My gloves were torn. Mud was on my gown. I looked poor. She let the word settle. Poor. In that room, it sounded almost indecent. People saw me, Eleanor said. Do not comfort yourselves by imagining I was invisible. I was seen, and no one moved. Cressida's smile had vanished. Ladies in fine gowns turned their faces away. Gentlemen stepped around me. A coachman shouted when I came too near his wheels. I asked for my son, and London answered with indifference. Her voice shook now, but not from weakness, from truth. Then Clara Hartwell stopped. Head Eleanor reached back and took her hand. She did not know my name. She did not know my rank. She did not know whether anyone would reward her, praise her, or even believe her. She had one piece of bread. The room seemed to hold that image in candlelight. One piece of bread, against all the silver and champagne and sugared cakes waiting on trays beyond the ballroom doors. She was hungry, Eleanor said, and she gave it to me. A woman near the mirror covered her mouth. Eleanor turned her gaze to Cressida. Any lady may wear silk. Not every lady knows mercy. The words struck cleanly. Cressida flinched. For the first time all evening, she looked young, not innocent. Lady Beaumont moved as if to rescue her daughter, but Mr. Langford stepped forward. My lady, my lord, he said, bowing. With your permission. Alistair nodded. Mr. Langford opened his leather case and withdrew a folded document. This codicil was written by the late Viscount Wycliffe. It states that any person who preserves Dowager Viscountess Eleanor Wycliffe from mortal danger, abandonment, or harms is entitled to the protection of the Wycliffe name, a yearly allowance, and residence at Roseford Cottage should such protection be desired. A wave of astonishment moved through the room. Mr. Langford adjusted his spectacles. Miss Clara Hartwell did not request these terms. She did not know they existed. She earned them before she knew the Wycliffe name could offer her anything. Lady Beaumont's face hardened. A convenient discovery, mister. Langford looked at her with professional distaste. Legal truth often appears inconvenient to those who prefer rumor. A few gentlemen coughed to hide their reaction. Then Mr. Grantham stepped forward. Quiet. Plain. Immovable. Further confirm, he said, that Lady Cressida Beaumont's maid carried notes between Lady Cressida, Lady Beaumont, and Lord Edmund Haverford before and after the dinner at Wycliffe House. Lord Edmund's face changed. Careful, Grantham, mister. Grantham did not look frightened. Very careful, my lord. That is why I kept the notes. The room sharpened. Lady Beaumont turned toward Edmund with panic in her eyes. Grantham continued. One instructed Lord Edmund to ensure he was seen admiring Miss Hartwell before her lack of reference was exposed at dinner. Another praised the success of that humiliation and stated that Lady Cressida must not be displaced by, and I quote, a charity seamstress. The words moved through the ballrooms like smoke. A charity seamstress. Clara felt the insult once, then felt it lose power because this time it was not whispered behind her back. It had been dragged into candlelight. Florence Westbrook, standing among the attendants near the side doors, stepped forward before fear could stop her. Mrs. Vale looked as if she wished to call her back, but Florence's chin was level. I heard Lady Cressida tell Miss Hartwell that his lordship may admire poor girls in candlelight, but marry women who can stand beside them in society. A gasp came from somewhere near the musicians. Florence's voice trembled, but she continued. Miss Hartwell left Wycliffe House because she believed the false engagement. She did not scheme, she did not ask. She was heartbroken. Clara closed her eyes. The word was too private. Heartbroken. Yet in that moment it did not shame her. It freed her. Cressida looked at Florence with fury. You impertinent girl. Alistair's voice cut across the room. Miss Westbrook is under my protection while she speaks the truth. Florence's eyes filled. She stepped back. Lord Edmund attempted to laugh. This has become absurd. Surely we are not to take the word of maids and stewards over that of gamblers? Alistair asked. Edmund went still. Alistair looked at him. Your debts are known. Your arrangement with Lady Beaumont is now known. Your attempt to coerce Miss Hartwell at the King's Lantern was witnessed by half a common room and documented by Mr. Grantham. Edmund's charm finally broke. This is slander. No, Alistair said. This is restraint. Slander would have been kinder. For one moment, it seemed Edmund might answer with anger. No friendly faces remained, only curiosity, disgust, calculation. The social world that had protected him while he smiled now stepped away from him because exposure had made him inconvenient. Lord Edmund Haverford bowed with stiff hatred and withdrew. Lady Beaumont stood pale and rigid. Cressida's eyes shone, but not with tears of remorse, with rage. Eleanor looked at her one last time. You wish to be mistress of Wycliffe House, she said quietly. You began by proving you could not be trusted with a single defenseless girl. Cressida had no answer. There was none left that would not worsen her ruin. Lady Beaumont gripped her daughter's arm. They left the ballroom together, not banished loudly. Worse, allowed to walk through the silence they had earned. The doors closed behind them. For a few seconds no one spoke. Then the orchestra, uncertain and terrified of silence, began a soft strain of music. But the assembly had changed. The ballroom no longer belonged to rumor. It belonged to truth. Alistair turned to Clara. Every eye remained upon them. He knew it, she knew it. Yet when he spoke, his voice was for her alone. Miss Hartwell, the formality made her heart ache. Yes, my lord, I have defended your name because justice required it. Clara held his gaze. I know my mother has honored you because gratitude required it. Yes, my father's codicil protects you because honor requires it. She swallowed. Yes, he stepped closer, not too close, never taking what had not been offered. But what I say now is not required by justice, gratitude, or honor. The room seemed to disappear around them. Clara heard only him. I have spent my life believing rank could preserve order, that discipline could prevent pain, and that silence could protect what mattered. His voice lowered. Then you stood in the rain and proved that goodness does not wait for permission. Clara's eyes filled again. Alistair continued. Not gratitude, not forgiveness, not affection. Your name has already been defended. Your courage has already been recognized. Your place is protected. Whether you accept me or refuse me, that mattered. More than a declaration made under pressure. More than a proposal used to repair scandal. He was not saving her now. He had already done that publicly. This was something else. This was choice. If you can trust me after my silence, he said, if you can forgive the fear that made me too slow to speak, then I would spend my life proving that I know the difference between rank and worth. Clara could barely breathe. Eleanor stood beside them, crying openly now and not caring who saw. Alistair's eyes never left Hartwell. Not because you saved my mother, though I will bless you for that until my last day. Not because my household needs you, though it is better with you in it. Love you because you were noble before anyone gave you permission to be. Clara's hand trembled, the ballroom waited. But this answer was not for the ballroom. It was for the girl outside the bakery, the hungry girl with one piece of bread, the girl who had stopped. Clara looked at the man before her, the feared viscount, the grieving son, the proud nobleman who had learned painfully that love could not be managed like an estate. What it laid wounded me, she said softly. I know. You were silent. I am afraid of this world, I know, and I am afraid of loving you. His face changed. Tenderness broke through control like dawn through fog. I know. Clara took one breath, then another. But I do love you. The words were quiet. They shook him more than thunder. She smiled through tears. And if I stand beside you, my lord, I will not stand beneath you. Alistair bowed his head. Never. Then yes, a sound applause. Not yet, something softer. A collective breath released. Eleanor took Clara's hands and drew them between her own. My daughter, she would. Clara broke then. Not into shame, not into fear, into joy. She leaned toward Eleanor, and the dowager held her as if the rain had finally ended. Alistair stood close, one hand near Clara's back, not claiming, only guarding, and when Clara looked up at him, the smile that touched his face was small, astonished, and more beautiful because it had clearly been unused for a very long time. Later, people would say many things about that night. They would say Lady Cressida Beaumont's ambition had been exposed before half of London. They would say Lord Edmund Haverford had left town shortly afterward to avoid both creditors and conversation. They would say Grantham's quiet memory had done more damage than a duel. They would say Florence Westbrook, once only a maid with a brave tongue, had been raised to a trusted position in Lady Wickliffe's household. They would say Viscount Wickliff had shocked society by choosing a seamstress over a lady of rank. But those who had truly been present would remember something different. They would remember an old woman standing beneath chandeliers, telling the truth about rain. They would remember one piece of bread. They would remember that, in a room full of inherited names, the noblest act belonged to a girl who had once had nothing. Months later, winter settled over Wickliff House. Snow softened the iron gates. Frost silvered the garden paths. The great mansion no longer seemed quite so severe. Fires burned warmer. Footsteps sounded less afraid in the corridors. Laughter, once rare, began to find its way into rooms that had long preferred silence. In the kitchen court, just before dusk, a new custom took root. The side door opened every evening, not the grand front entrance with its pillars and polished knocker. The kitchen door, the one closest to hunger. A table was set there with loaves wrapped in clean cloth, bowls of broth, and sometimes bundles of mended clothing. Servants came first to help, but soon neighbors learned the hour. Then flower girls, then old men with shaking hands, then widows who apologized before accepting anything. Then children sent by mothers too proud to come. No one was asked to prove deservingness at the door. Bread was given first. Questions came later. The servants called it Lady Clara's hour. Clara did not like the title at first. It embarrassed her, but Eleanor loved it. She must learn to be obeyed, the dowager declared. It will be good for her character. Alistair, standing nearby, had looked at Clara with grave amusement. I do not, Clara said. No, he admitted, but I might learn. Florence laughed so hard she had to turn away. On one particular evening, Clara stood at the kitchen door as snow began to fall in soft, careful flakes. She wore a warm gown now, a proper cloak, gloves without holes, but when an old woman approached the door, shivering and ashamed, Clara stepped forward herself. No need to ask, she said gently. She placed bread into the woman's hands behind her. Eleanor watched from a chair near the fire, wrapped in ivory wool, her face peaceful. Alistair stood beside the doorway, his expression quiet. Not cold, not with Clara now. The old woman took the bread and began to hers. Eat first, she said. Then we shall see what is needed. Eleanor's eyes filled. Alistair looked at his mother, then at his wife-to-be, and in that moment, he understood fully what his mother had known from the beginning. Clara Hartwell had not become noble because a viscount loved her. She had not become worthy because society finally looked her way. She had not become important because a legal codicil placed the Wickliff name. She had been noble in the rain, noble when hungry, noble when unseen, noble when the world had nothing to offer her in return. Rank can be inherited. Kindness must be chosen, and the Viscount's mother never forgot.